She is one of the closest people to Russian President Vladimir Putin. And tonight, 5 months into Putin's invasion of Ukraine, the Biden administration is finally sanctioning Putin's rumored girlfriend, Alina Kabaeva. Up until now, the U.S. had been reluctant to go after Kabaeva. They had feared that it could escalate the conflict and, infuriate Putin. Putin has never confirmed having a romantic relationship with Kabaeva or that the two have children. Thanks so much for joining us. AC 360 starts now.
Good evening. Primary elections tonight in 5 states: Missouri, Michigan, Kansas, Arizona, and Washington. Polls are closing just now in all or parts of 3 of them. Abortion is on the ballot in Kansas, and supporters of the former president's election lie are running in Arizona and elsewhere. 3 Republicans who voted to impeach the former president are all facing tough primary challenges from candidates that he's supporting. In Arizona, State House Speaker Rusty Bowers, the conservative Republican State House Speaker who refused to help overturn the election and testified before the House Select Committee. He is also facing opposition backed by the former president in his state Senate race. Some of those very same candidates are also being supported controversially by Democrats hoping to run against more extreme opponents in the fall. All of this with inflation and fears of a recession as a backdrop, President Biden's recent legislative actions and foreign policy decisions on the table, and midterm elections now just 98 days away. CNN's John King is over the magic wall tracking all the important races and trends. Let's check in with you first. So, John, Missouri polls are just closing. As you know, the former president caused a lot of confusion in his Senate endorsement of 2 people named Eric, both running for the same office. How is that race shaping up?
Yeah, Anderson, the fact that we're talking about Missouri is actually the story, in the sense that this is a retiring Republican incumbent, Roy Blunt, in a midterm election year where the wind is at the Republicans' back. This should be a safe seat hold for Republicans. But as you noted, the former president decided at the last minute to get involved. What did he mean? Eric Greitens, the disgraced former governor who had to resign because of allegations of misconduct. He now wants to be in the Senate. Did he mean Eric Greitens, or did he mean State Attorney General Eric Schmitt? Well, Donald Trump trying to be cute here in a very important race. Republicans are not happy with this. Both Eric Schmitt, by the way, the Attorney General, and Eric Greitens, the governor, back to varying degrees Trump's big lie. So that's on the ballot again tonight. But the Democrats believe if Greitens can win this nomination, they might have a shot of picking up this seat. Think of the gift that would be. A 50-50 United States Senate. Republicans have a chance to take control. The Senate is the most competitive battleground if you look through governor's races, House races, et cetera. If the Democrats are in play in Missouri after tonight, that is a gift for the Democratic Party, plain and simple.
Michigan, obviously another important state for midterms in the next presidential cycle. What are some of the key races there?
And so obviously you have a gubernatorial primary there as well. Governor Gretchen Whitmer is up. Let me get to that one here and bring this up here. And again, Trump came in late in the governor's primary here, endorsing Tudor Nixon. Again, Ryan Kelly, another Republican candidate, was here in Washington on January 6th at the United States Capitol. Tudor Dixon backs the big lie. So if you just think about it again, Michigan, always a competitive battleground state. Governor's race is even more important now that the Supreme Court has kicked the abortion issue back to the states. Will the cancer of the big lie continue to spread among major Republican candidates for office? Will Republican voters, after the January 6th hearings, as we get closer to the midterm elections, will there be a snapback? Michigan will be one of the places we learn that.
And obviously Arizona, I mean, there's a lot going on in Arizona. The governor's race has underscored the Trump versus Pence proxy battle among GOP voters. What are you looking there tonight for?
So again, if you bring up the 2 candidates, Kari Lake has gone to the full extreme, if you will, of channeling the big lie. She's channeling Trump literally, saying if she doesn't win this primary tonight, it's because there's cheating. If she wins, apparently, Anderson, there's no cheating. But if she loses, there's cheating. That is Donald Trump personified in his preferred candidate in this race. This is Trump versus Pence. Karen Taylor Robson is endorsed by Mike Pence. This is also Trump versus the Republican establishment, the current Republican governor whose term limited backs Taylor Robson. So you have the Trump establishment. But Arizona could, by the end of the night, nominate a full slate of statewide candidates who back the big lie. Again, we need competitive political parties in this country. This is not an anti-Republican statement, but the cancer of the big lie in the Republican Party is on the ballot tonight. Will the Republican Party finally say enough, or will it, in a critical battleground state this year for Senate and governor, obviously in the next presidential election and every presidential, the next 4 or 5, Arizona is going to be key battleground state. Do Republicans say enough, or do they say big lie, deniers? Yeah. We will nominate them.
A lot to watch for. We'll come back to you shortly. John, I want to drill down now on Arizona. CNN's King Law is in Scottsdale for us. Do you have a sense of how much of an impact the former president's influence is expected to be in Arizona tonight, particularly in the primaries for governor and secretary of state?
Absolutely. Certainly, it's no secret that Trump is endorsing here, and they know exactly who he is endorsing. A lot of the voters we've spoken to certainly know that Kari Lake is, as John just described, Trump personified. That is no secret. How it will play out with voters, if there is enough of that Trump base remaining here in Arizona, is going to be the question. That is the question that should be answered by the end of this evening. Remember, 2020 never really ended here in Arizona. This is a place where there was the partisan-led review, that bizarro world of ballot counting on that stadium floor, where Trump forces, shortly after the election, put pressure on local officials. So there is a true battle here, a war between the election liars and the people who believe in democracy. The people who are going to the polls here in many places, Anderson, right behind me, are certainly understanding that Trump has endorsed. Some say it played a part. A lot of people are saying not as much. So that's a question that we need to wait to be answered.
I assume some of the people saying not as much are the non-Trump endorsed campaigns.
Absolutely, and actually, when I've been talking to a number of sources, I was just telling you about the amount of pressure that was put on local officials. I've spoken to a number of those local officials, and they say, really, by the end of tonight, they will find out if the party in Arizona, if the Republican Party in Arizona is lost or not. That's what they feel is going to be happening tonight. So there's very little daylight between candidates like Karen Taylor Robson and Kari Lake. When you look at the issues like immigration or the economy, there is almost no difference. The big difference is how far they're willing to go with dangerous rhetoric and embracing something that is not true. And then something else I want to mention, Anderson, Secretary of State, here's somebody who wants to oversee elections. He went to QAnon conventions and wants to completely change the election system to something that's nonsensical and simply wouldn't work if you talk to federal election officials. So that's what's going to be happening. Is this going to go by way of bizarro world, or will the Republican Party pull back and go back to Republican values, according to the many people I've spoken to today about what is at stake here?
King, I appreciate it. As John King mentioned a moment ago, Missouri is home to the two Erics, Greitens and Schmidt, both of whom got the former president's endorsement last night in the Republican U.S. Senate race, or neither of whom, depending on really how you look at it. CNN's Jeff Zeleny joins us now with the latest there. So what are you hearing from campaigns about how this last-minute kind of endorsement of the two Erics is going to influence anything, or not?
Anderson, there's no doubt that Eric Greitens is trying to stage an epic comeback 4 years after he resigned as governor. And that is the question that Missouri voters are going to answer today. Are they still concerned about those allegations? He admitted some of them, having the affair with his hairdresser. He has denied strenuously allegations of abuse of his ex-wife and his child. But this is what has hung over the race for the last several weeks here. And his fellow Republicans have tried to stop his candidacy through millions of dollars in television ads reminding Missouri voters about all of those sort of details. So Eric Schmidt, the Missouri Attorney General, has really risen in the last several weeks, really taking advantage of some questions about the Greitens candidacy, but also Congresswoman Vicky Hartzler. She has been in Congress for the last 12 years. She told me yesterday that she would not vote for Eric Greitens if he becomes the Republican Senate nominee. That is what worries Republicans in Washington considerably, because this, of course, should be a safe Republican seat. But in a 50-50 Senate, every seat matters. So that is what concerns Republicans. If Eric Greitens wins tonight, is he going to be able to be a credible general election candidate? We should also note, though, there are 21 Republican candidates on the ballot entirely, so the vote will be split up. Mark McCloskey, who you may remember from St. Louis, he and his wife stopped protesters at their home 2 summers ago holding a gun. He's also running for Senate, and his yard signs are all over the state here, John. So this does appear to be a three-way contest, at least as Republicans were going to the polls. But the big question, will Eric Greitens stage a comeback or not?
Yeah, that's definitely something to watch for tonight. Jeff Zeleny, appreciate it. Thanks. John King is back joining us as well. CNN senior political analyst Mark Preston, CNN political director David Chalian, and CNN senior political correspondent Abby Phillip, anchor of CNN's Inside Politics Sunday. Abby, let's, I guess, start with Arizona, the election deniers.
I mean, there's so much going on here, as Kyung pointed out. But this is a state where I think, Arizona politically right at this moment is probably as far to the right as one could be in terms of this election denying phenomenon. These are Republican voters who go crazy over Sharpies, who did their sort of election audit with a kind of as people have described it, almost like a fake firm running this audit and finding nothing at the end of the day.
The cyber ninjas.
The cyber ninjas. Yes. They protested outside of ballot counting offices that week of Election Day back in 2020. They are all in on the big lie, and it shows based on who they are choosing between from top to bottom on this ballot. So this is a place where that state, the Republican Party, is going all the way to the right, but the state is a purple state. Remember, Joe Biden won Arizona, and he won it bolstered by a growing population of young Latino voters who are trending more Democratic in Arizona, maybe not elsewhere, but in Arizona. And so this state politically is splitting apart, and Republicans are moving away from the center.
Yeah, I mean, when you think of like Rusty Bowers, a conservative Republican who's been was Speaker of the State House, he's now persona non grata among a lot of Republicans in Arizona.
Yeah, and it's not just the commitment to the big lie that Donald Trump tells about the 2020 election. What I think is so important about tonight in Arizona and in Michigan, two critical battleground states, two states that will help determine who the next president is. You have these election deniers seeking positions of oversight of elections. Right. So everything we look at with the January 6th committee, right? You mentioned Rusty Bowers. There were people who stood up and said no. Right? Like, it's going to be country over party for me. That happened in enough places with enough Republican officials to turn Donald Trump's efforts away. Now you have these people who are committed to not just expressing his lies and repeating them, but actually potentially committed to overturning elections that they would then have oversight over if they didn't like the results. That's what I think the biggest danger is in the way in which these Republican primaries play out tonight.
You also have this sort of Trump-Pence proxy war. I don't know how significant that really is.
I mean, I think it's more a Trump proxy war against the establishment of the Republican Party, and we use Mike Pence or we use Doug Ducey, the governor of Arizona, as the person on the other side. You know what's interesting too is that we're going to these primaries that are being held in the middle of August right now, the dog days of August. We're not going to see record turnout. We're going to see is turnout by those who are most motivated, who are going to be very likely to be election deniers. They're more motivated to go out to try to take back and win that seat than it is for these more centrist Republicans to try to defend it and hold back. So when we look at the results at the end of this week, because we won't get results in some of these races until the end of this week, I think we got to look at really the Republican Party. Has it been taken over by activists that are willing to continue to push the big lie, but are also willing to be involved?
John, in Michigan, there's the key primary challenge for the GOP Congressman Peter Meijer, who's one of 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach the former president after the attack on the Capitol. What are you watching for that in that race?
Well, you're watching to see if the January 6th hearings, if all this attention on Donald Trump's misconduct, abuse of power, dereliction of duty around that election, does that impact Republican voters? Do they finally decide, enough, we're not going to carry out Donald Trump's grievances anymore? 10 Republicans voted to impeach him. There are 3 contests tonight, Peter Meijer in Michigan, then 2 out in Washington State. I think it is a key question. Are Republican voters willing to support their Republicans who are incumbents, or are they going to carry out Donald Trump's grievances? Do the January 6th hearings, do Donald Trump's reemergence have any impact? What is also common about all 3 of these districts, and I just want to come back to the other map to connect it to the points you're discussing with my colleagues, is the suburbs. Those are suburban Republican districts. The suburbs will decide who wins in Arizona. The suburbs will decide who wins statewide in Michigan. The suburbs decide all the close elections in American history. Suburbs made George W. Bush president. They supported Donald Trump just barely, and then they rebelled against him in 2018 and 2020. Suburban America is going to decide what happens in November, and it's also going to have a big voice tonight, suburban Republicans tonight in Arizona, in Michigan, in Washington State, and in Kansas on the abortion question tonight. Suburban America will speak, and the Democrats will be watching Kansas probably more than any state to see what is the message.
Yeah, what about, I mean, in Kansas, abortion really is on the ballot for the first time since the Roe v. Wade decision was overturned.
Yeah, I mean, this is clearly a first test to watch. It is a bit of a kind of hothouse of a situation where everybody's attention is on it. And the results have been that in terms of turnout, that there's a lot of interest in this referendum, but there is also a lot of confusion about this ballot initiative. Referendums are often confusing for voters. And so the people who are going to the ballot here are going to have to pay very close attention to what they are voting on, because a yes means basically no to abortion in the state. And that is going to be very confusing to people. But millions and millions of dollars pouring in on both sides of this issue. And I think it will show us a little bit whether or not either side of this can gain the upper hand. And I think also what I'm looking at tonight in Kansas is there are a lot of women who, that you might ask them, they might personally say, hey, I don't support abortion, but they are not comfortable with the state putting in place complete abortion bans. And I think that is going to be something that we learn a little bit more about after the results of this referendum in Kansas.
You also have in Washington State, and John referenced this, some Republican candidates who are facing primary challenges because they voted in the second impeachment against the president. I mean, does that still have power to bring people out to the polls?
So I mean, it certainly does. I think if you look at two numbers, three tonight, you have Peter Meyer in Michigan, and you have these two Republicans in Washington State right now who all voted to impeach Donald Trump. Then you look at the number 10. Those were the total number of Republicans who had voted. Where are they now? 4 are retiring. 1 has already lost a primary. 1 has won a primary. 3 could lose a primary tonight. And Liz Cheney at the end of August, is heading on a way of losing a primary, even though she has stood up for, for the country above party. So, look, Donald Trump may not be the leader of the party in 2024, but Donald Trump's ideals will certainly drive the party.
David Shelley, Mark Preston, Abby Phillip, thanks so much. Appreciate it. John King, we're going to check in with you later as the results come in. Next, the debate over Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan and the fallout already from it. New York Times columnist Tom Friedman joins us for that. Later, first on CNN, more missing January 6 text messages from the former administration. This time, it's not the Secret Service, it's the Pentagon. More on that ahead. The visit is big, but the potential repercussions are bigger. House Speaker Pelosi and a congressional delegation arriving in Taiwan's capital, Taipei. China responded by announcing live-fire military exercises in waters surrounding the island. The Biden administration did not want the speaker to visit Taiwan, but the president stopped short of directly telling her not to. Lawmakers are split, so are many experts, with our next guest, New York Times foreign affairs columnist Thomas Friedman, opposing it. In a piece written shortly before the speaker's arrival, he called the visit utterly reckless, dangerous, and irresponsible. Nothing good will come of it. Tom Friedman joins us now. He's the author, by the way, of countless bestsellers, including Thank You for Being Late, An Optimist's Guide to Thriving in the Age of Accelerations. So, Tom, why was this the wrong thing to do?
Well, let me make clear, Anderson, I like Nancy Pelosi. We wouldn't have had the Affordable Care Act without her. She's been a great legislator. But this has the feel to me of a swan song of someone who feels her speakership is ending, maybe her time in politics, felt very strongly about human rights in China, and wanted to make this trip now. I get it for Nancy Pelosi. I don't get it for America. She had a right to do this, but doesn't mean it was right to do at this time. What did I feel about it? I feel that we have one overriding foreign policy goal right now, Anderson, and that is to ensure that Vladimir Putin's army in Ukraine is at least stalled and ideally evicted from Ukraine. That is the number one foreign policy issue of the United States. Now, in service of that goal, the Biden administration, through some very tough talks with China's leader, got China to agree not to send arms to Putin. That was very important at the beginning of the war. It's even more important now in month 5, when Putin's army is really running low on certain munitions. Doing anything right now that would interrupt that Chinese decision, or deflect our attention, or put us into a two-front confrontation with the world's two biggest superpowers besides us at the same time, seems to be just terrible decision.
I want to point out what Speaker Pelosi said in the Washington Post about why she was going. She said, by traveling to Taiwan, we honor our commitment to democracy, reaffirming that the freedoms of Taiwan and all democracies must be respected. And I'm sure if she heard you, she would point out that she went to Kyiv to see and meet with Zelensky to emphasize the importance of the war in Ukraine.
God bless her for doing that. And by the way, she's absolutely right. In principle, we should be doing that. I'm a big believer in we should defend Taiwan's democracy. I think it's very important. I actually agree with the president on that. It's just whether it's the smart thing to do right now, whether you want to put us in a situation where we're juggling two superpower confrontations at the same time. I hope the Chinese will do a sound and light show and then be done with it. But they may not, Anderson. And people seem to forget that China's army is very, very large and very sophisticated. And our goal for Taiwan, as someone like myself who believes in the freedom and democracy of Taiwan and that it should be perpetuated, to me, the right way to do that is by just keeping Taiwan on the news. Quietly arm them, turn them into a porcupine that China would say every morning, you know what, not today. Don't want to put my hand on that. And quietly keep it that way, because who knows, over time China may change, the situation may change. Every day that Taiwan's democracy thrives is a good day. Grandstanding around that right now doesn't make sense to me.
John Kirby, who's the NSC spokesman, said that there's no daylight essentially between the intent of the speaker's trip to reaffirm American support of a democratic Taiwan and the White House's backing of the one China policy. Substantively, does the trip really change anything? I mean, other than ratcheting up the tension?
Right. Yeah, I think that's all it really does. And believe me, I hope it dies down. Sheila made her point. But if it doesn't, if it contributes to another thing we have to be concerned about, which is, one reason Vladimir Putin probably invaded Ukraine was probably because he felt the window of opportunity was closing, that Ukraine was getting strong to integrate it into the European Union. I think we have to be concerned that what we are telling Xi right now is the chance for any peaceful unification of China and Taiwan is over. And I don't want Xi to conclude, you know what, my window of opportunity for seizing Taiwan may be over. And so I think we got to think about all these different dimensions to the story.
Do you think, if this ends without any major escalation with China, do you think it just fades away? Do you think it hangs over U.S.-China relations for some time?
It'll leave a bad taste, but we have many things we need to do with each other right now, the U.S. and China. We have a broad agenda from trade, obviously, to geopolitics. I hope it dies down. I hope that China, again, sets off a few flares, whatever it does, and by a week or 2 weeks from now, it's all over. But you have to ask Nancy Pelosi, if you're going to do this, what is the strategic context in which you're doing this? What is the strategy? Is it just to make a point? Or is it to make a point now in this context? Because I think this relationship between us and Taiwan and the friction it could cause with China is more important than anything going on with Russia. There's just to say we have a right to do that. Yes, we have a right to do that. That doesn't mean it was right to do right now. That's my only argument.
No, Tom Friedman, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, more missing texts related to the investigation surrounding the January 6th attack. This is incredible. This time involving some former top military officials. Details ahead. Tonight we're learning about yet another agency with deleted text messages connected to the investigation surrounding the January 6th attack. Now, this new revelation involves the Pentagon and comes after obviously a similar controversy involving Secret Service agents. In court filings, a watchdog group, American Oversight, says it had tried to get the records of officials, including former Acting Secretary of Defense Chris Miller, former Chief of Staff Kash Patel, and former Army Secretary Ryan McCarthy. There's no suggestion the officials themselves erased the records. According to a joint filing by the government and American Oversight, quote, DOD and Army conveyed to plaintiff that when an employee separates from DOD or Army, he or she turns in the government-issued phone and the phone is wiped. For those custodians no longer with the agency, the text messages were not preserved and therefore could not be searched, although it is possible that particular text messages could have been saved into other record systems, such as email. Now, a short time ago, January 6th committee member Zoe Lofgren says the committee was not aware of the missing text messages and called it concerning. I'm joined now by CNN senior law enforcement analyst Andrew McCabe, a former deputy director of the FBI. I'm wondering what your reaction is to this news, especially coming on the heels of similar revelations about the Secret Service, the Secret Service and the Department of Homeland Security.
So, Anderson, we are now looking at essentially the same coincidence at the Department of Secret Service, at the Department of Homeland Security, and now at the Defense Department. It's starting to look less and less like a coincidence. There is in the absolute least case, there's a complete and total failure to abide by and live up to the responsibilities under the Federal Records Act. So, yeah, this is becoming more confounding the further we look.
Zoe Lofgren, who's on the January 6th committee, told us that, to her knowledge, the committee wasn't aware of the erased text messages. Pentagon officials say they only found out today, they only found out today after CNN reported it. What does it say to you about the level of transparency that the committee is actually getting from relevant federal officials?
Well, it's sorely lacking, and that could be the committee's responsibility. Maybe they haven't done a good job in organizing their requests and monitoring those requests that they have outstanding to all the different agencies and the different players that are involved in this massive investigation. But on the other hand, it might be on the agency's side for failing to respond, for obfuscating, for not responding in a fully forthcoming way. But, this is the sort of thing, Anderson, that could be very simply investigated by a competent investigative entity. This is, it's almost unbelievable to think that the Department of Defense doesn't have a system in place to make sure that those people who serve at a high enough level, that their communications, their personal notes, their briefing materials, all that stuff comes under the federal records preservation requirements. It's impossible for me to believe that they don't have a process and an entire staff that's responsible for collecting that material and sending it to the National Archives. So yeah. Did that happen? If not, why?
I should say I misspoke, actually, when I was asking you a question. Zoe Lofgren said that the Select Committee told CNN that, to her knowledge, the committee wasn't aware of these erased messages from Pentagon officials. Not Pentagon officials weren't aware. But I mean, to the argument that, well, look, this is just part of the process. You hand in your phone when you leave government, it gets wiped. Nothing to see here. You're saying for officials at a certain level, the Records Keeping Act should kick in.
Of course. When I started working at a high enough level in the FBI, certainly as an executive assistant director or as deputy director of the FBI, one of the first things that happened when I took that job was I received a security briefing in which our lawyers explained to me that essentially everything I read, everything I touched, everything I wrote had to be captured and preserved, and that the staff would do that, and all those records were collected in one place and would ultimately be sent to the National Archives. And that, of course, includes all your emails and your text messages. The FBI has a system in place that text messages are actually collected from every FBI phone while the phones are being used. I guess some agencies don't go that far, but it's not that hard to make sure that the Secretary of Defense, on leaving the organization, his phone should get at least mirrored and preserved for all kinds of litigation reasons, for discovery reasons, and of course, the Federal Records Act.
And is it possible to recover deleted text messages? I mean, one hears about deleted text messages being recovered all the time in sort of court cases or in lawsuits, but officials that were cited in this lawsuit, including former Acting Secretary of Defense Chris Miller, former Chief of Staff, former Secretary of the Army, I mean, they're viewed as crucial witnesses to understanding the government's response on that day.
So the effort to recover those messages is certainly worth undertaking. Whether or not you could do it successfully really depends on the technology involved. You'd have to recover those phones, and then you'd have to subject those phones to a pretty detailed forensic analysis. If they were simply deleted, you could probably recover them. If the phones were wiped and the memory was reconfigured in those phones in the process, you might never get them back. So it really depends on what kind of action was taken on those devices.
Yeah. Andrew McCabe, appreciate it as always. Thank you.
Thanks.
Coming up, 9.5 years of hell. That's how a Sandy Hook parent describes the pain he has endured because of conspiracy spreader and liar Alex Jones. The father says that Jones has tarnished the honor and legacy of his murdered son. More in his courtroom testimony today. Next. Devastating testimony from two Sandy Hook parents today in an Austin, Texas courtroom in one of several defamation cases against conspiracy spreader Alex Jones. This is the first of three to determine monetary damages for falsely portraying the massacre as a hoax. 2 in Texas, 1 in Connecticut, where 20 first graders and 6 adults were murdered nearly 10 years ago. Testifying in Texas today, the parents of 6-year-old Jesse Lewis. Jones also took the stand late today and got admonished by the judge. He'll continue his testimony tomorrow. We'll have more on that in a moment. But first, the parents' message for the court from CNN's Miguel Marquez.
My son existed.
My son existed, says Scarlett Lewis, the mother of 6-year-old Jesse Lewis, speaking directly to conspiracy theorist Alex Jones in an Austin, Texas courtroom.
Jesse was real. I am a real mom.
In an utterly unthinkable sign of our times, Scarlett Lewis makes the case that she and her dead child are real, directly to Jones.
It doesn't exist, that I'm deep state. It's just not true. I know you know that. That's the problem. I know you know that. And you keep saying it. You keep saying it. Why? Why? For money? Because you've made a lot of money while you've said it. I know you're, I mean, I know you believe me. And yet you're gonna leave this courthouse and you're gonna say it again on your show. You're saying no, you just did it.
On his show today, he raised questions about both Scarlett Lewis and the boy's father, who are seeking up to $150 million in damages.
He is being manipulated by some very bad people. But I'll just say, because I gotta be honest, he's slow, okay? And his ex-wife is not.
The man Jones is calling slow and manipulated, Jesse Lewis's father, Neil Heslin.
I was blessed with him for 6.5 years. He's been gone 1.5 times. But I cherish those days, those years with Jesse.
In all, families of 7 victims and 1 FBI agent have successfully sued Alex Jones for defamation in 3 different trials taking place in both Texas and Connecticut. Jones testified he was simply trying to get answers to questions that others were asking.
I never intentionally tried to hurt you. I never even said your name until this case came to court. I didn't even really know who you were until a couple years ago when all this started up. The internet had a lot of questions. I had questions.
Based on a separate legal filing, families of Sandy Hook victims allege Jones is using bankruptcy laws to shield tens of millions of dollars from any possible liability. Miguel Marquez, CNN, New York.
Lots to discuss. Joining me now is Elizabeth Williamson of the New York Times, who was in the Austin courtroom today. She's the author of an extraordinary book called Sandy Hook, an American Tragedy and the Battle for Truth. Elizabeth, what happened in the courtroom today after the judge left the room?
It was an emotional day, to say the least, Anderson. And at the end of that day, after the judge went back to her chambers, Alex Jones approached Scarlett Lewis and Neil Heslin, Jesse Lewis's parents, shook their hands. I think Scarlett offered him a bottle of water because he had been coughing throughout his testimony, and he was telling them that he was sorry. The lawyers kind of got into the middle of this because they see this as a kind of gambit, because Jones has repeatedly said that he's apologized to the parents, but this has always been a backhanded apology, bookended by another charge against them for being actors or what have you.
I mean, the fact that they have to be in the same room with this person and touch his hand, you know, the fact they're willing to touch his hand to shake it when he reaches out to them, it says a lot about them, but it says really nothing about, I mean, Alex Jones has said all there is to say about him. He has shown himself to be who he is. In testimony, can you just talk about what Neil Heslin, Jesse's father, says about the violent threats that he has faced?
Yeah, so
Neil has said that people have confronted him on the street. He's gotten anonymous phone calls. But most alarming in his testimony today was the fact that, and I had this in my book as well, that someone fired a gun into his house. Today, he further testified that this spring, someone drove by the house in a car, yelled Alex Jones, and he could hear the sound of gunfire. So for him, this is far beyond some kind of online harassment. It's a very real threat. And Scarlett spoke to the fear that sort of stalks them ever since the shooting.
But I mean, the fact that any grieving parent who has lost a little child has to have a second of their life thinking about this sick crap that this person spreads, it breaks my heart that a grieving parent has to go through this. I mean, no part of their mind should ever be occupied with the existence of this person. Jones took the stand today. I know the topic of his company filing for bankruptcy came up. I mean, does he just shield? How does he shield his money, or does he?
He has a web of LLCs in which he has, got a sort of shell game, it appears to be going.
LLCs are limited liability
families,
corporations.
Correct, yes. And lawyers for the families say that he's been shifting money around. They think that the bankruptcy filing is a pure gambit. He tried to say before the jurors, in fact, he did say that he was bankrupt. That is false. He has filed for bankruptcy, and that is still being adjudicated. He has also tried to submit that he tried to apologize or that he was fully compliant in the run-up to these trials. In fact, the reason he's on trial for damages is because he had such utter disregard for the judicial system that he was defaulted in all of these cases. He lost the defamation cases because he refused to comply. But he keeps attempting to relitigate these cases when, in fact, he's already been found liable, and these trials are just for how much he must pay these families.
It's fascinating to see him in court with all the bluster and bravado he has on his, internet show. To see him, trying to apologize, such as it is, to these parents in order to just kind of, lessen the verdict. What's expected to happen tomorrow?
So tomorrow he will continue to testify, but I have to say, and I really want to make sure that people understand this, this was a singularly powerful moment for Scarlett Lewis in particular. I mean, he was squirming in his chair, and she would not let him look down or fidget. She was addressing him directly, and one of the things she said was, "Alex, I want you to hear this." She wasn't angry. She actually was compassionate, and that was even more powerful. I mean, the room was really riveted, and he was extremely uncomfortable. It was an accident of scheduling that he was even there while she was still testifying, and it was quite a moment.
Well, I mean, it's extraordinary the grace and strength that she has to be able to I mean, as we see right now, just talk directly to this person who has spread unbelievable things. Elizabeth Williamson, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Anderson.
Coming up, we're going to check back in with John King, Magic Wall. More primary results coming in and more expected at the top of the hour when some Arizona polls close. The latest next. Polls are beginning to close in Arizona in a few minutes, and more results coming in from Kansas, Missouri, and Michigan. I want to check back in with John King of the Magic Wall. So polls start closing soon in Arizona. How big of a message could the state's GOP gubernatorial primary possibly send to the rest of the Republican Party?
Well, the question, Anderson, how deep, as we await the results and the polls closing, how deep is this cancer of supporting the big lie, saying elections are rigged, in the Republican bloodstream? Kari Lake is the Trump-endorsed candidate there who has said if she loses this primary tonight, it's because there's cheating. Who does that sound like? So how deep is it in the Republican Party in Arizona? Not only in this race for governor, this is Trump versus Mike Pence, Trump versus the Republican establishment. How deep is it in the race for governor? Or will Arizona Republicans tonight possibly nominate an entire statewide slate of candidates who back the big lie? Or will the Republican Party finally say enough and move on? That's the big question in Arizona.
It's incredible that she says there's cheating if she loses. Of course, I assume, as you said earlier, I think if she wins, no cheating.
It's funny how that works.
Yeah. What new information about results in Missouri and Michigan do you have?
So let's go to Michigan first because you have the governor's map up. Tudor Dixon, who Donald Trump did endorse at the last minute, she previously had the endorsement of a very prominent Republican in the state, Betsy DeVos, the well-financed DeVos family. She is leading early on, about 11% of the vote counted, but she has a healthy early lead. And if you notice, looking at the map, the yellow, every county that has reported votes so far, Tudor Dixon is leading. Got a ways to go yet, but that's an encouraging sign clearly for Dixon there. She would face the Democratic incumbent, Gretchen Whitmer, if she is the nominee. And we switch to that Senate race in Missouri, and you see purple on the map right now. That is the Attorney General, Eric Schmitt, one of the two Erics, if you will. Donald Trump said he totally endorsed Eric. Is it Eric Schmitt or is it Eric Greitens? Eric Schmitt is leading right now with 40% of the vote. Eric Greitens running a distant third, the former governor. Again, this is only about 3% of the vote right now. Vicki Hartzler, Republican Congresswoman, is second at the moment. I just want to note, Anderson, as you watch the map fill in, you see her support out here in the west central part of the state. That's her current congressional district. So Vicki Hartzler, not all of these counties. As you move further east, these are outside of her district, but these counties right in here are Vicki Hartzler's congressional district. So not a surprise, she's running strong there, but a long way to go.
John, do you know like every county in every state?
Not everyone, but 3,000 plus. They're worth studying. America's a great place.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the fact that you remember all this is incredible to me. So Kansas voters weighing in on a proposed state constitutional amendment on abortion. We talked about it earlier in the program. Any sense of how close that may be?
In some ways, this might be the most interesting thing tonight. Democrats have a theory that because of the Supreme Court decision, suburban Republicans will come home to Democrats this year. They don't want to support Republicans. So is that the case? And the Democrats will come out of the woodwork to vote? No. If you want to change the Kansas Constitution and allow the legislature to ban abortion, then you're voting yes. If you want to keep Kansas Constitution in place right now, which guarantees at least a basic right to an abortion, you vote no. No is leading at the moment. Again, only 8% of the vote in, but that's a pretty big lead out of the minute. So what is the turnout here? You heard me say earlier, Anderson, the suburbs, Manhattan, Topeka, Kansas City, Kansas. This is suburban parts right here in the state. At the moment, those who support abortion rights are leading in the state of Kansas. A lot of votes to count.
John King, appreciate it. Thanks. We'll be right back. News continues. Let's hand over to Laura Coates and CNN Tonight. Laura?
Anderson, thank you so much. I'm Laura Coates, and this is CNN Tonight. And as they say, with 98 days to go into the midterm elections, which is like tomorrow or a long ways away, depending on how you view politics, it's election night in America once again. The polls are now closed in Michigan, in Kansas, and parts of Arizona. 5 states have primaries today, including key battlegrounds that could shape the race for which party will be the majority. Democrats once again, or Republicans yet again. No, Donald Trump is not on the ballot. That's true, but he is casting a pretty big shadow as he continues to endorse some. It's not always clear, I might add, who he is endorsing, but more on that in just a moment. And the timing is going to be pretty interesting here. I mean, it isn't just post January 6th, it's post the first series of January 6th hearings, about to see whether it actually impacted voters and in which way it did. It hasn't seemed to impact the platforms, though, of candidates in several swing states. Some continue to echo the baseless fraud claims, and there's a whole slate of them in Arizona who are running for top positions like governor and attorney general, secretary of state, and Senate, consequential office holders for those who maybe are running elections. Also being closely watched, the Senate race in Missouri. Trump's endorsed an Eric. Okay, but which Eric did you mean to endorse, sir? Rivals Eric Greitens and Eric Schmitt, well, they both claim that Trump meant them. And Trump, for his part, really has yet to clarify. I mean, even now, on election night. And it seems to be causing a lot of chaos and some confusion into an already tumultuous race. Meanwhile, you got the fates of a trio of Republicans who voted to impeach then-President Trump over the insurrection. And their seats, well, they hang in the balance tonight. Let's get the latest from CNN's chief national correspondent and anchor of Inside Politics. John King is at the magic wall. Look, John, polls have already closed in Missouri. So what can you tell us about the race there?
One of the Erics, Laura, is leading in the Senate Republican primary. That would be the State Attorney General, Eric Schmitt. Only about 4% of the vote counted, so we need to count a lot of votes tonight. But Eric Schmitt, one of the Erics, is leading with 40% of the vote, 41% if you round up. Congresswoman Vicky Hartzler in second with 27%. Eric Greitens, the former governor who resigned in disgrace and amid scandal, is running a distant third at the moment at 17.2%. But again, a long way to go in the vote count. You see a lot of yellow here. That's Congresswoman Hartzler. She's a Republican Congresswoman, Laura. This is about where her district is out here. Some of these counties are out of her district, these to the south, these to the east. But the chunk of them right here, that's her congressional district. So she's running strong at home, if you will. But a long way to go as we count the votes here. That we're even talking about this race is what is significant. And that this is a Republican-held seat. Roy Blunt is retiring. Republicans should hold it in November. Democrats think it's possible, if Republicans have all that chaos you're talking about, it's possible to keep an eye on this one. But we'll keep counting votes.
I mean, who knew that the name Eric was the new Cher, John King? You only have one name now. That's the new thing. It's a new fad. I'm setting it up here. You also have 3 congressional Republicans who voted to impeach Trump. They're facing primary challenges tonight. How are things looking for them?
So let's bring up the state of Michigan, where we have some votes in one of those races. 2 of them are out in Washington State. We don't get those results till later. But right here, let me come right in here, just Grand Rapids, Michigan area right here. Again, results are early, only about 5% of the vote in. But Peter Meyer is the incumbent. He is one of 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump. Donald Trump has vowed to exact his vengeance on him. Trump endorsed John Gibbs, the challenger, who has 63% of the vote at the moment. You see a little about 1,000 votes ahead. Again, this is only 5% of the votes. We have a long way to count. But as you watch this district fill in, Republicans around the country watching this tonight to see, even after the January 6th hearings, even after all this damning testimony from Donald Trump's own aides and allies about that he knew it was a lie, do Republicans still want to punish those who voted to impeach him? We'll keep counting.
John King, stay close. Glad to have you here. And here to help us pack all this in and put it all into perspective, our former Democratic Congresswoman Abby Finkenauer, also CNN senior political analyst Ron Brownstein, and former special assistant to George W. Bush, Scott Jennings. We've got Iowa, we've got California, we've got Kentucky.
Yep.
This is a focus group in and of itself. People pay to have these moments here. So let's talk about this moment here. First of all, I wonder, what does it say that Trump still casts this very large shadow? Are his endorsements really that impactful? I wonder sometimes, are we giving him too much credit? Do we over-talk about the influence he may have? I know the Eric thing is funny, but is it oversized?
I think it's most impactful in multi-candidate primaries. If you've looked where he's had the biggest amount of movement in candidacies, take Ohio, for example, where J.D. Vance was sort of at 3rd or 4th place, and he came in late and I think delivered the nomination in Ohio to J.D. Vance. So in Missouri, he's endorsed one Eric or the other, or maybe both of them. And it's likely, I think, Schmitt will win. We'll see. We got a lot of votes yet to count. Don't want to over-speculate while we're counting them. But he'll obviously want to claim credit for that. Same thing in Arizona, multi-candidate field, and he obviously came in for Blake Masters. So I think he does cast a big shadow. It's most helpful in bigger primaries where you've got lots of candidates and people are trying to sort out. Because a lot of these, and Ron knows, you've run. In these big primaries.
And you've won, by the way. I'm going to give you the credit. You've run and you've won.
But in party primaries, a lot of the candidates all saying the same thing. Same issues, same talk. So when somebody comes in that people trust or think they trust and says, this is my person, it can make a big difference.
I have a very serious question for you, Ron. I want to know which Eric do we think he was endorsing? I have a full screen here. I think these are the different people who it possibly could be. And I'm wondering which of these people do you think? It must be, is it Eric Holder? Is it Eric Carter? It could be any one of them. Clapton?
Up there?
Eric Church is up there? We're doing them all.
He hedged his bets. The point.
I couldn't help it.
To Scott's point, I think looking at Trump's personal win-loss record is the wrong metric, because it's not only his tap on the shoulder, it's the fact that he has reconfigured the Republican coalition over these last 6 years in a direction that makes it more likely for Trump-style candidates to win. The party is more dependent on the kind of voters who respond to a Trump appeal, culturally conservative, non-urban, non-college, older, evangelical voters, and the kind of white-collar, culturally moderate, economically conservative voters have been drifting away from the party. So the entire baseline, it's not only who Trump is endorsing, it's who's endorsing him. There are very few candidates anywhere in the country that are running and saying the party has got to move away from him. And I know Scott and I have argued about this before. But the entire baseline has moved in a Trump direction. And that has implications not only for the primaries, but as we'll talk about in a minute, for the general elections as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And what I'm thinking about is less his impact on these particular candidates, and more so just his impact on the Republican Party and what it says now about the Republican Party, that these are who your people are. I mean, regardless of which Eric we're talking about in Missouri, they're both pretty terrible. I mean, they both believe the election was stolen. They believe, you know, in conspiracies and lies, and they peddle them for their own personal gain. And that is who the Republican Party sadly is now.
You know, on that point, I want to play what Carrie Lake had to say about the idea of pushing the baseless claims. It's kind of a page out of what Trump said, you know, more than a year ago now, about the idea of, if I should lose, here's what happened.
The only way they can win is if they load up the voter rolls with dead people, people who've moved, and imaginary friends.
So when you hear that, of course, it's a bit of a deja vu. But the real issue to me as well, and Abby, this is your point about this is who the Republicans are. I do wonder if that's going to backfire for Democratic voters or for Republican voters in the long run, because there was a time not too many years ago when it was, I need you to have a platform, and I'm going to go towards the platform, as opposed to I'm going to go towards not voting for someone in particular. And I wonder if the focus is consistently on, look, these are the Republicans, this is who they are, as opposed to Democrats. Are you going to talk about the economy? Are you going to talk about the issues that matter to people? I mean, is that a real concern?
Well, look, I mean, Democrats, you can have policy differences in a platform, but what we're talking about, when we're talking about the Republican Party platform, they're literally changing it, like in states in Arizona, where if you don't essentially believe that Trump won the election, you're not a Republican anymore. There is a very big difference there. And again, it is really horrifying to watch this continue to happen. And it's going to be on Democrats. Do we educate voters enough to talk about how extreme this is and where these folks have gone? Because it's not attached to reality anymore. And that's a terrifying thing. We already have people in elected office who believe in these conspiracies, who are not attached to reality. And are we going to have more people like that elected? And what does that mean for the future of our democracy if they are?
I want to ask you, Scott, about reality, but you just told me that you have a pet pig now. So I'm not really, I don't know how tethered we are to reality in this moment in time, but it's real. But I'm giving you a hard time, but it's a cute story. But seriously, when I think about reality, I mean, is she right?
Well, I mean, my rebuttal to that is Republicans would argue that Democrats aren't tethered to reality on the economy. I mean, they're passing a bill right now in the Congress.
There's a difference
here. It says we're going to reduce. It says we're going to call it the Reduce Inflation Act. It doesn't reduce inflation. We've got tax increases now identifying as tax cuts or something. I mean, they're not tethered to reality on the issues that matter to most people.
We're talking about democracy here and
just
facts about an election. We're talking about facts here, not policy differences, just, you know, cold-hearted facts about an election.
You're not terribly familiar with my views on this. And there's a big difference, by the way, between Eric Schmidt and Eric Greitens. But the reality is this election is about the economy.
Hold on. I want to hear all of you. It's important the audience says as well. But I want to, you poll in this all the time.
So
what is the reality in the polls?
Look, by most objective measures, this should be a very rough election for Democrats. The first midterm is always tough. 9% inflation has not been the case in 40 years. The president approval rating is 40%. There's a lot of headwinds working at Democrats. But I will say, as a declarative statement, if Democrats avoid the worst in November, especially in Senate and governor's races, it will be because of what we are seeing tonight, which is that Republicans have the potential to nominate too many candidates who simply are not good fits, can't compete, particularly in the white-collar suburbs that have been moving away from the party in 2018 and 2020. They have the potential to have a slate in Arizona and in Michigan that is going to be relatively easy to portray as extreme up and down. Now, they may get through anyway. I mean, the underlying current is such that some of these candidates who are out of the mainstream are probably going to win. But Republicans are making it much tougher on themselves than it might have been by nominating some of these candidates who I think are going to be very hard sells in places like Maricopa County, Oakland County, Michigan, the suburbs of Philadelphia. That is a consistent pattern, and it is linked to Trump's influence in the party.
Let me ask you, how does abortion rate in these conversations?
Very much. Is
it galvanizing? Is it fizzle out, you think?
Look,
even though it's a settled issue at this point?
But in these states, it is not settled. Right. And also, there's the issue of what's going to happen at the national level. No, there's no, like I said, if Democrats avoid the worst in November, it will be primarily, I think, principally because Republicans continue to lose ground in white-collar suburbs, and abortion is a big part of that. It's helping Democrats recap. There were a lot of center-right white-collar voters who voted for Biden in 20 because they didn't like Trump, have been disillusioned with Biden's performance, were open to Republicans, and are now moving back because of the confluence of issues like abortion, guns, January 6th, and the nature of some of these candidates.
Now do the Hispanic voters in Texas and
Yeah,
Nevada, because
right.
you've got whole other blocks of the electorate
Sure.
that went for Democrats huge in 16, 18, and 20 that are moving towards the Republican Party. So you're right. We do have a realignment, but it doesn't all benefit the Democrats.
You're right. You're right.
I'm glad you validated him before he went back to California. That was a tender moment. Do you feel that was nice? That was a nice moment. Ron Brownstein, thank you. Everyone, Scott, Abby, stick with us. We'll be right back. There are brand new developments tonight on missing text messages sent on or around January 6th. Go figure. But not from Secret Service phone members. No. Why were phones wiped of key Pentagon officials? Yes, it's true. CNN First is next. The trail of deleted January 6th texts, well, they now stretch all the way to the Pentagon. CNN was first to report on court documents showing that phones of several key Trump aides were apparently wiped at the end of the administration. Now, we know specifically Secretary of Defense Chris Miller, former Chief of Staff Kash Patel, and former Secretary of the Army Ryan McCarthy were among the officials whose phones were wiped. All are considered key witnesses to January 6th. DOD is just the latest department unable to suddenly find text messages from that day. We know the texts of multiple Secret Service agents were also deleted. Homeland Security also can't seem to find texts of the acting secretary and his top deputy. That's in addition to a 7-hour gap in the White House call logs. Same for the White House diary on January 6th. Well, then there are the reports of documents being burned by the White House Chief of Staff. Flushed documents found clogging the White House toilet, or torn up so that they had to be taped back together, preferably not after they were in the toilet, because I would feel bad for the person to do that. But you know, boxes of classified documents were also sent to Mar-a-Lago instead of where they're supposed to be sent. It's called the National Archives. I'm joined now by a digital forensic investigator, Gary Kessler, who I'm glad to speak with right now. Gary, I'm so glad you're here because while people are wondering where these messages have gone and, oh, they're just gone, they've gone poof into the ether, I'm always wondering, is there a way to get it back? Are these really gone or are they gone for now? Because when you delete a text message, they don't really go away fully, right?
Well, it depends how efficiently the wiping was done, if in fact wiping is the correct term. So on a cell phone, as you just observed with your question, if all you do is delete a message, then the message is somewhere still on the phone. And even if it's not accessible to the user of the text message app, for example, there's still fragments and snippets of the message, again, probably some on the phone, although they can be difficult to find unless you have the right tools. Now, on the other hand, if they truly wiped the phone, the most effective way to do that is, of course, Android phones and iPhones for the last at least 5 years. The operating systems are automatically encrypted, and there's a decryption key in the system area of the memory of the phone. So the most effective way to wipe all the user data is go into the system area and delete the decryption key, and then it doesn't matter what's in the user area, it's never going to be retrievable.
So what you've described would have to be an intentional act. Is that a common thing to have done? Would somebody, is it more likely in the work that you've done that people are just sort of deleting it on their phone thinking, you know, they can't actually see it? Is it difficult to go in the wiping as you're talking about? And do you know if that's what's normally done in the course of a change in administration?
Well, I can't speak at all to what the administration might do. In the work that I've done, when usually you have somebody who is not terribly sophisticated, and they're just deleting messages, and very frequently we can get them back either from the phone or we can get them back from, say, an iTunes backup or a cloud backup or something like that. If in fact I want to reissue a phone, and that's been one of the comments that's been made, you would possibly want to wipe the phone so that no remnants of the old user continue on with the new user. And so, yes, it's a deliberate act in that it's purposeful. It is not necessarily a nefarious action.
That's an important distinction, and we should note that we don't have information yet that this is somehow nefarious. But the idea of sort of the details of how one were to do this, I think, is fascinating, because just the idea of deleting it versus wiping is going to be the key inquiry going forward. Gary Kessler, thank you for your expertise.
Thank you.
I want to turn now to Miles Taylor, who was Chief of Staff at Homeland Security during the Trump administration, and also Elliot Williams, who served at both the DOJ and the DHS. So Miles, Elliot, he made a good moment there. The idea of, look, just because you delete it doesn't mean it's nefarious or wiping it. It could be a part of the course of things. However, this sort of notion of all these coincidences, I mean, at some point, if it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, I mean, quack, quack. So where are we right now?
Look, we all know this. If you delete a text message, it's kind of a sketchy behavior. So that right away is a red flag. And when I just heard him speaking, I mean, what stood out to me is that we were talking about wiping, you were talking about flushing things, down the toilet. One thing is clear, in the Trump administration, there was not good preservation of records. It's clear procedures weren't followed, and this is a problem. However, I will caveat this by saying, when I saw the news about DOD today, I started to think that this is less a big criminal conspiracy and more a culture of incompetence.
Absolutely.
You have these senior officials who turn in their phones, they kind of just wipe them, they put them away. The presidential records provisions have not kept up with the 21st century. I'm actually more interested not in the text messages of these senior officials, but in their depositions. What were these people doing? And we need to start interviewing them and getting those records. Also, has anyone asked for their personal phones? I knew a lot of people in government used their personal phones for this. And Elliot, I'd be interested in your take on whether they're asking for their personal text
And
messages.
it's an official record if you're conducting government business on your personal phone. Look, it's not just incompetence, but this idea, and we would have both seen it at the Department of Homeland Security. A lot of these folks believe they are the men on the wall saving America from tyranny and utter ruin. And the idea that investigators from Congress or the Justice Department can go poking around your emails or your text messages is just offensive to them. And so, of course, we're going to delete our things. Now, the problem is, for it to be a crime, there has to be an investigation. There's got to be, a subpoena or something like that. And as of January 6th, on that day, criminal investigations hadn't really been opened yet. And so it's, you're going to have a hard time right now, based on the information we have, charging any of those folks with obstruction of justice.
I mean, that's true, and I note that. But the same token, I feel like there's something odd about a moment where most people were watching, and it was essentially like frozen, like almost like a mosquito in amber. Watching Jurassic Park. The idea of thinking about that, and those are the days that you don't think to preserve. I mean, I want to play for you what the Attorney General Merrick Garland had to say about this issue. He was asked about whether he was concerned about the missing messages. Here's what he had to say.
Are you concerned about the missing text, though? I mean, is that something that's not?
I don't want to talk about particular cases. With respect to our own investigations, we pursue all facts as far as we need to pursue them, and we'll pursue them with all the tools we have under the criminal law.
So one of those tools, of course, are the inspectors general.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, I'm not always focused, although I'm a prosecutor, I'm not always focused on the only end game is criminal prosecution. Sometimes it's the investigation to find out what happened of things. How do you feel about the IGs overlooking at this right now?
So heads need to roll, let's be clear. Even if people aren't charged with crimes. Individuals have been fired or resigned from their jobs for far less than this. I think it was 2012, the head of the General Services Administration, GSA, resigned because they used government funds to hire a clown. Literally, and this is far more nefarious and terrible than that.
Well, Miles is afraid of clowns, and so it's now triggering.
I may have hired a couple. Let's not make it about clowns.
Look, let's not make it about. I'm conflicted about clowns. They make me happy, but I'm a little frightened of them too. But needless to say, you can lose your job for that. You ought to lose your job for overseeing the possible destruction of evidence.
But I got to key into something that Elliot said earlier. Again, if on your personal device you sent an official communication, then that official
communication. What does that mean,
official
communication? Like,
well,
does that
let's
mean
think back
I'm talking to a colleague or
what? What did Hillary Clinton get knocked for years and years and years? The emails. Why were they knocking her for the emails? Because they were on a private email address. The thing that I think, in fact, I've heard no one talking about this yet, is I know some of these government officials were conducting official business via text messages because it's what they used to do during the administration.
Let me send this Word document to my personal email so I can work on it at home. That becomes a government record even if you're using your Gmail.
But does that mean the entire phone becomes the record that can be obtained validly by the government, or does that mean the record itself? Because that's the is it text by text will go through? Is it page by page? And if everything's gone already, how do you begin?
It's a great question. Look, it was widespread practice in that administration to use encrypted message apps to communicate. People were using that. I'm not saying that we know for sure that senior officials during January 6th were doing that. All I'm saying is that, if people are really worried about private email being used for official business, text messages, which we're looking at now, absolutely were between senior officials, and that should be something that is probed in this instance.
Look,
go ahead.
Look, it might be lawful, but it's awful. Literally, it's conduct, and to use a cute little catchphrase, but it's conduct that even if you can't be charged with a crime for it, even if maybe you can't lose your job for it, our government should not be engaged in. Full stop.
Awful and lawful. Your new bumper sticker.
Look at that.
I mean, we covered clowns. We've got a whole thing. We're rhyming now. This is a beautiful Tuesday. It's Tuesday, right? It's election night in America. Of course it's Tuesday. You weren't listening to John King. Miles Taylor, thank you. Elliot, stick with us as well. Up ahead, one of the country's most popular music festivals has just been canceled. Music Midtown in Atlanta called off this year in a decision likely linked to gun laws. We'll take on the controversy with the president of the Atlanta City Council next. Fall Out Boy, My Chemical Romance, Future, and Jack White. Those are just a few of the headline performances that tens of thousands of music fans had hoped to see at next month's iconic Music Midtown Festival in Atlanta. Organizers, however, abruptly called the event off just yesterday, citing circumstances beyond their control. No more details were offered, but sources say that Georgia's gun laws are what's to blame. There's one law in particular that allows firearms to be permitted in public spaces, and that includes parks, I might add, which gun advocates say conflicts with the festival's weapons ban. Joining me now is Doug Shipman, president of the Atlanta City Council. Doug, thank you for being here this evening. For people maybe just learning about this for the first time, it's quite the intersection between what the gun laws are doing and saying and the impact possibly on entertainment, on the economy. What's the issue here? That the festival, a private entity, wanted to ban weapons and the Georgia laws said, nope, bring the weapons. You're entitled to do so in a public space. Is that it?
So we've had consistent laws that have been opening up the access to guns, the ability to carry guns in various spaces. There was a 2019 Georgia Supreme Court ruling that basically said on private property and on long-term leased public property, you could have weapons restrictions, but on public property, you could not. And so in this case, the music festival doesn't have a long-term lease. It's there for a couple of days to have the event. And there was a concern that there would be legal jeopardy because of the restrictions against any restrictions on public spaces.
And they can't contract away that requirement or that ability to bring it in. They can't say as part of like an entertainer's rider, look, there can't be weapons, that's enough to trump this?
So I came out of the entertainment industry before I was in elected office. There are often riders from artists. There are also insurance issues related to security plans. And I said those things did not have any impact on the state law. And this state law has been written in a way that limits local officials from being able to make more restrictive laws. So in essence, the state has said, we're going to make the law and you can't change it at the local level. There's one other issue here. More recently this year, we also have a permitless carry law that passed in Georgia. So the proliferation of those who can carry without a license, without training, has expanded. So also the fact that you couldn't have a restriction on weapons, also in a situation where we know there are more guns that people are carrying around naturally, I think led to a lot of questions around liability.
I mean, it's hard to think about this in a vacuum, right? We know what happened in that horrible, tragic Las Vegas shootings that took place. There was a music festival going on. There were concerts happening. So there is the natural concern that one would obviously think of. And there's also the economic notion here. I mean, the cancellation, it means a $50 million loss, they believe, to the Atlanta economy, according to some reports about this. It was supposed to take place next month. It featured 30+ artists. It was going to host local food venues. What is the impact of this economically? And does this forebode harsher conditions going forward, in the sense that this might make people say, well, let's not go to Atlanta. I mean, even the North Carolina governor just tweeted out in response to what's going on, he tweeted out a reaction to this very notion saying, come on up to North Carolina. We're ready to welcome you to one of our amazing outdoor spaces to help you host a fun and safe festival. When you see this and what it could mean for the economy and for businesses or entertainment going elsewhere, what's your reaction?
It is a major concern. There was a study done a few years ago that you cited $20 million in direct spending, $30 million in indirect economic impact. This festival hosted 50,000 people a day for 2 days. We know that people come nationally for it. It's a major festival that's been going on for 25 years, but it's not the only one. We have a festival called Shaky Knees that happens in another park. We have one called Sweetwater 420 Fest that happens in another park. And so this may not be the only festival that can no longer happen in a public space. They might be able to find a private space, but we don't have a large outdoor private space that really makes sense like some other cities. And so it may have to move out of the city. And so these economic ramifications are significant in big dollars, but they're also, as you pointed out, very significant on small businesses, a lot of locally owned food trucks, small businesses, folks connected to our music industry, which is a very vital part of what we do, will be impacted. And I would say one more thing, and the tweet that you pointed out, we know we're always in competition with other cities like Austin and Miami, Nashville, for music and for economic development more broadly. And I do have a concern that people are going to maybe not even bring new things that could be coming here because of what they're seeing. So I think the economic ramifications could be quite extensive and could be much larger than just the Midtown music cancellation.
But will it shape policy? I mean, I wonder, are you hearing from your constituents and the voters and the electorate more broadly in Georgia in reaction to this? Has there been some backlash in resulting this?
Well, this festival is really focused on young people, but it's also one that a lot of us have attended over the years who have been in Atlanta. It's really one of those memory maker kinds of moments. So I have been hearing from folks that are quite upset. We do have an election here for state legislature, governor, other constitutional offices. So I'm hopeful that no matter who's elected next January, when our state legislature comes back into session, that we'll really look at the implications of this policy, whether it was an intended or an unintended consequence. Clearly, there are economic implications. And so there are ways. We know we have gun restrictions in airports and stadiums and other private venues. We certainly could have a carve out for ticketed events, for large events, for music festivals. I hope that we'll look at those policies because this is going to damage the Atlanta economy going forward. No question about it.
I wonder if it's going to be the blueprint, too, for other states who may have similar conflicts, and for entertainers to think about that and where they choose to go, and, of course, where they spend their money, and, of course, the overarching concern of safety at the core. Doug Shipman, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Look, it's now tomorrow in Taiwan. We're going to take you live to the other side of the world for the very latest on the storm over House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's historic visit. China is still threatening retaliation. An update on the flaring tensions will be next. Just minutes ago, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi gave a historic address before Taiwan's parliament. She's now meeting with Taiwan's president. And in making this trip, Pelosi defied hesitation from the White House and also threats of retaliation from China. In her address, Pelosi spoke of America's friendship with Taiwan, and she pledged more cooperation. Here with you now with more is CNN senior international correspondent Will Ripley, who's always on the story. Tell us what you know.
Well, you know, we are just like everybody else watching very closely to see how Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, second in line to the U.S. presidency, is received here in Taiwan. And so far, it has been a very warm welcome, even though the Taiwanese government was pretty much radio silence before her plane landed. Once it did, Taipei 101 lit up with a welcome message. As you said, she's meeting with President Tsai Ing-wen. She's also had a chance to meet earlier with members of Taiwan's parliament, where she gave a speech, and she talked about the reasons why she's here, and really in stark contrast to what we're seeing right now from mainland China with these military exercises happening just off the shore. Listen.
Come in friendship to Taiwan. We come in peace for the region, and our chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee, Mr. Takano, representing our veterans, understanding the value of peace and the avoidance of conflict.
Pelosi made it very clear that the reason why she's here is to show solidarity with the island of Taiwan, which has been under an increasing amount of intimidation, both militarily, diplomatically, and economically from mainland China, Laura.
There's been a lot of conversation around that trip, as you well know, and there was that piece she wrote in the Washington Post as well, talking about why she was there. But you mentioned the flight, and we see images of her, landing. And speaking of that flight, there's some new reporting that CNN has about that flight to Taiwan. What did you learn?
Yeah, I mean, that's a flight that I've taken myself, and normally if you're flying the normal direct route, it's only about 4.5 hours. It's at least under a 5-hour flight for sure, and that's how long it would normally take. But Speaker Pelosi's flight took more than 7 hours, according to CNN reporting, and the reason for that is they were trying to avoid potentially this. I don't know if we have the map handy or not, but the 6 locations around the island of Taiwan where there are military drills that have been taking place since the overnight hours here shortly after Speaker Pelosi arrived. These military drills, some of them so close to the shore that it's possible that people living along the coast could actually hear them. And certainly if anybody were to use to try to head out in the water a little bit closer to these drills, they'd find a large amount of activity, which is very, provocative, certainly, especially because some of these drills, the coordinates that they were released by the People's Liberation Army might have actually gone into Taiwan's territorial airspace. Now, we don't know if that has happened. We don't know if that's going to be publicized by the Taiwan military and the Defense Department if it does happen, because, they certainly don't want to dial up the tension here, and they've actually been uncharacteristically quiet when talking about these latest provocations, even though usually, Laura, they tell us, 2 times a day how many planes have flown into Taiwan's self-declared air defense identification zone. But I think the strategy from the Taiwan side is to keep everything as low-key as possible, even while they try to show Nancy Pelosi around, and hope that the experiences that she has here she'll take back to Washington, and they'll help shape American policy if and when the time comes that China does make a military move on Taiwan.
Well, they may be uncharacteristically quiet, but you know who is not, and that's Speaker Pelosi. I hope that she addresses the idea of why there was the diversion, if there's a broader issue at stake. Will Ripley, thank you so much. We'll be right back. Look, they don't call her Queen Bee for nothing. Beyonce's new album, Renaissance, is already breaking chart records, but it's also buzzing with controversy. A song on the album called Heated is being criticized for including an ableist slur. Listen. Disability rights activists say the word spaz, which was used in that particular lyric, is offensive towards people living with spastic cerebral palsy. According to the CDC, people with spastic cerebral palsy have increased muscle tone. This means their muscles are stiff, and as a result, their movements can be awkward. A rep for Beyonce tells CNN she's updating the song. The word, saying, quote, the word not used intentionally in a harmful way will be replaced. Abby, Elliott, and Scott are back with me right now, and I should say the person most excited to talk about Beyonce is Scott Jennings in an odd revelation of sorts. But I bring this up because, look, and it can be uncomfortable at times to talk about the things that people react to, that have visceral reaction, that can lead to what we know as the so-called cancel culture of things. And Lizzo just changed a lyric as well. It's not unheard of for people to be enlightened that the use of a term is offensive and to no longer use it. But I think you put it best, Elliott, the idea of, look, sometimes you get the information, you realize that it's offensive, and what you do then is up to you.
Yeah, no, I agree. Language evolves over time. Oh, okay, I'm going to give you the floor for a moment.
I'm listening. Yeah, you had a smirk. We knew you were like, tell me more.
Ready to pounce on this. No, I want to hear
you defend the thought police.
I'm not defending the thought police. Okay, well, let me use a better example for you. The state song of Kentucky, My Old Kentucky Home, for 130 years had the word darkies in it. Until, over time, people realized this is not language that we in a civil society ought to be using, and they changed it. And I think there ought to be room for people to recognize that, you know what, I've grown my whole life saying the word spaz, but maybe that's not language that we ought to be using. It doesn't take anything away from any of us to purge the word spaz from our vocabulary. You can still use most of the English language. So my question is, how are you affected by it?
Well, I think we're all affected when people who are creative artists, Beyonce, one of the most renowned artists in our culture, one of the most talented people that alive today, when they have to go around policing their artistic expression because they might possibly offend a handful of people. I'm not denigrating these people that have the disease. I don't, not at all. But it's obvious she was not intending to hurt, harm, or offend anyone. And I'm just saying, when you start bending over for the speech police on one small issue, the floodgates are open. And how are you going to have artists expressing themselves if they're constantly calibrating against these people who are sort of professional, professionally being offended by everything?
Abby, what's your thought?
You know, I hate calling it the speech police here. What we're talking about are, disability advocates. And when you look at where the term comes from, spastic cerebral palsy, I mean, I think there are a lot of folks who don't understand that or even know where that comes from. But now that you do, and you're hearing from these advocates, we should listen, right? And we should have respect for that. I mean, heck, you watch, there are so many things that you look back and go, oh man, that didn't age well. Even something like Gilmore Girls, right? Like the first season of that, you have Rory using the R word and just very nonchalantly. And I watch that now and I go, oh my goodness, this should not be happening, but it did, because once you learned, right, what that word meant and why it was offensive, you took it out of our vocabulary. And I think, again, kudos to the disability community who continues to actually lift this up and explain what it is, because I think right now we're on CNN talking about spastic cerebral palsy when I think a lot of folks didn't even realize what it was.
I think this is where the American left is failing.
Right.
Because they are speaking a language and they are thinking about things in a way that most people in America don't even recognize. And this idea that we're going to go around and nitpick they're trying to cancel Beyonce. For goodness sakes.
Well, this
is where the left is falling short in connecting with the American people.
Well, first of all, the Beehive is not going to cancel Beyonce. You hear the buzzing right now, but go ahead.
But I want to get back to the evolution of language, right? And it's just, but explain to me how.
Are you offended by this?
But it doesn't matter whether I'm offended by it. That's not the point.
But don't you understand? There is a constituency that could be offended by virtually everything.
Okay,
so
but
how are you going to? Eventually, is this the goal to have nothing?
I'm not intending to zing you by making this about Kentucky, your home state, but literally, you have a state song where.
And you're comparing that to this.
I am, because over time, language evolved. Think about all the terms, the R word, that all of us probably used in childhood. Right? That we now know is abhorrent and should never be used. And you just don't know.
Who's going to be in charge of giving us the list of the things we're not allowed to say?
But I think
it's about educating, though.
We're
having the conversation. It's about educating, though. I mean, we're having the conversation right now, and it's also about having grace, right? When folks aren't aware. And the fact is, Lizzo changed her lyrics. Beyonce changed her lyrics. I understand, it was really frustrating to see this happen just 6 weeks after, Lizzo was told what happened and why it was wrong. And then you have Beyonce doing it. And I understand that frustration, but she changed it and she apologized. And I think it sets the tone for the rest of the music industry to pay attention.
Scott's Christmas card this year is also the album of Renaissance. He's on top of a clear horse as well. You didn't know. I've exposed you, everyone. You are. Abby Finkenauer, Elliot Williams, Scott Jennings. Thank you for this conversation. It's an important one to have. We'll be right back. Hey, that's it for us tonight. Don Lemon Tonight starts right now. Hey, Don Lemon.
Hi, Laura Coates. It's a big night in America. It's election night. We're going to get to it. Great show. I'll see you tomorrow.
See you later.
This is Don Lemon Tonight. As I said, it's election night in America, and results are coming in from primaries in 5 states. CNN is projecting that Trump-endorsed candidate Tudor Dixon will win the Michigan Republican gubernatorial primary, and CNN projects that Eric Schmidt has won the Missouri GOP Senate primary. We're going to have more results to come. Tudor Dixon and Eric Schmidt, the winners there. But the fact is, in state after state, democracy is on the ballot tonight. Will the GOP be the party of Trump and his election lies, or is there any room left in the party of Lincoln for candidates who defend our free and fair elections? We may get some answers tonight. The last polls just closing right now in Arizona's primaries, where Trump-backed candidates are all over the ballot running for the Senate, the governor, and the Secretary of State, in a state that has been ground zero, really, for Trump's post-election defeat revenge tour. CNN's Kyung Law is live for us in Phoenix, Arizona. Sarah Murray is in Grand Rapids, Michigan, with more on the results there. And CNN's Jeff Zelny is in St. Louis, Missouri. CNN's John King is at the Magic Wall to break it all down for us. We have a lot to cover for you. Good evening to everyone. I want to get straight, though, to Sarah Murray in Grand Rapids, Michigan with the very latest. Sarah, you're in Michigan. CNN is projecting that Trump-endorsed political commentator Tudor Dixon wins the GOP gubernatorial primary. Tell us more, please.
That's right. Tudor Dixon is just behind me. She is giving her victory speech. She's thanking her supporters. You know, this has been a long and chaotic Republican primary in Michigan, and Tudor Dixon is kind of seen as the establishment candidate in the race. Her rivals were bashing her for that, and Donald Trump came in just a few days ago and threw his endorsement behind her, which obviously made a difference in helping her break away from the rest of the field and clinch her victory. You know, this has been interesting because she's been up against a number of election deniers. And she's sort of bandied about on how she feels about the 2020 election, at some point saying she believes it was stolen, and then backing away from that in recent days gone.
So, Sarah, and Michigan Congressman Peter Meijer, he is one of 10 House members to vote for Trump's second impeachment, and yet Democrats have attempted to boost his election-denying opponent. Explain that one, please.
I think, of just how much Democrats want to be able to hold on to the House. And when it comes this fall, you know, they want that seat to flip into the Democratic column, and it's pretty clear that they are willing to spend money on an election denier to do that. Obviously, this has been a huge point of frustration to Peter Meijer, who says, you know, you see Democrats out there talking about how people who are election deniers are a threat to democracy, a threat to America, and yet here Democrats are propping up his opponent, an election denier, in the race, Don.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. Stand by. I'm going to get now to Jeff Zelny, St. Louis, Missouri. Big news where you are. Tell us about the Senate race.
That's correct, John. We are projecting that Eric Schmitt, who's the Missouri Attorney General, will be the winner here in the Republican Senate contest. The big story, though, of course, is former Missouri Governor Eric Greitens. He was trying for a comeback here 4 years after resigning in disgrace from his office. He is being defeated handily tonight. Right now, he is in a distant third place. And this really came about over the last several weeks or so when his conduct from office became a central issue in this race. And Republicans simply thought that he could lose the seat for the party. Missouri, of course, is a deep red state. It has been a decade since a Democrat has won statewide in a Senate seat. But Republicans in Washington across the board were concerned that if Eric Greitens would become the nominee, he would in fact put the seat in risk. And that is what the candidates campaigned on. After spending some time here in the last couple of days with Eric Schmitt, he was quite blunt about the fact that the state simply should not elect someone who is unfit for office, in his words, someone who is an alleged wife abuser and a child abuser. Of course, Governor Greitens denied all of those allegations. So tonight, of course, about 24 hours after the former president issued an endorsement for the two Erics, Eric Greitens and Eric Schmitt, one of those Erics won. But, Don, it had very little, if anything, to do with Donald Trump's half endorsement. It had everything to do with the fact that Eric Greitens collapsed, and the people who know him best, Missouri voters, simply did not want to risk the Senate seat and clearly show they had no tolerance for a return of him to public life. So Eric Schmitt will be addressing the crowd here behind me in St. Louis County shortly. But certainly this gives a lot of pause to Republicans in Washington that I've been speaking with in the last few minutes here, Don, are breathing a sigh of relief. They believe this is will now be a safe seat for them come November.
All right, Jeff Zelny, thank you very much. In St. Louis, I want you to stand by when we get to Arizona now, where the polls just closed. Our Kyung Law is there. Kyung, we will soon start seeing the results, and all eyes are on the governor's race there, pitting Trump-backed versus Pence-backed candidates. You're with the Pence-backed candidate, Karen Taylor Robeson, at the watch party there. How's our campaign feeling? What's the mood?
Well, the best way to put it is that they are simply holding their breath and they are watching the clock, because we are expecting the first results to drop in just about an hour, a little under an hour. This is going to be the early vote released by Maricopa County, the most populous county. That will be about 70% of the vote, says the county. And how this county goes is really going to tell us where Taylor Robeson stands tonight. The margin of how much she is ahead has to be big. It has to be a certain percentage. The campaign isn't telling us what they're looking for specifically, but the bigger the margin, the bigger the chance that she has to fend off Kari Lake. The campaign says voters in this state, in Arizona, the Republicans were given a clear choice. It was Vice President Mike Pence backing Karen Taylor Robeson. She's backed by the establishment, by Governor Doug Ducey. Contrast that with the Trump back, lie-embracing Kari Lake. She has fully embraced Donald Trump's 2020 election lie, has made it a centerpiece of her campaign. This campaign says that choice was very clear. Two different styles of governing, two different styles of campaigning. They believe how Republicans decide where they want their party to go tonight will tell us the power of Donald Trump in this critical battleground state, Don.
Kyung, there's a full slate of election deniers on Arizona's ballot, including one in the Senate race. More about that. What's going on there?
Up and down the ballot. Let's first address that, Don. Not only in governor, but in the U.S. Senate race, as well as Attorney General, Secretary of State, and further on down. Donald Trump has certainly made his wishes and endorsements known in the state of Arizona. Blake Masters is his choice for U.S. Senate. It is a crowded field. This is a much more crowded field than this one, where there's a clear choice here. Blake Masters, he has also embraced Donald Trump's lie. In fact, he put out an ad, Don, that said he believed Trump won in 2020. Reminder, he did not win in Arizona. Don?
All right. Kyung Law. To John King now. John, you're at the map. What are you watching for tonight, sir?
A number of key questions. I think Republican voters, right? We're picking candidates for key races in November. What are Republican voters going to tell us? What about those election deniers in Arizona? What about the state of Michigan? Another thing I'm looking at, Don, I just want to switch the map right here, is a very important initiative. The first time abortion has been on the ballot since the Supreme Court made its decision in Kansas. And again, a Republican state, has a Democratic governor, but a deeply Republican state. What are Republican voters telling us? Do they think the Supreme Court went too far? The early results in Kansas, we're not done yet here, say yes, that in a state that is a very red state, no means you do not want to open the Kansas Constitution to allowing the legislature to ban abortion. No is leading right now in Kansas. We're only at 51% of the vote, but no is leading at the moment. So Democrats are going to watch this closely. Are suburban Republicans so upset at the Supreme Court decision they're willing to vote for Democrats in the fall? Will the abortion issue in Kansas, where you have Democrats, Joe Biden, let's go back in time and look at it this way. Joe Biden won 5 counties in Kansas in 2020. Donald Trump won convincingly. But if you come back to where we are now, to the initiative, you see the counties that Biden won are all overwhelmingly voting no right now. Is this the turnout gift, if you will, turnout issue for the Democrats? That's one thing to watch tonight as we count the Kansas vote. But then I think the more broadly, Don, whether you're looking at the House Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump in these key governor primaries or Senate Republican primaries, I'll just bring Missouri up on the screen and let you jump in. How deep in the bloodstream of the Republican Party is this attack on democracy, is questioning the institution of democracy? After the January 6th hearings, after everything we've heard from Donald Trump's inside team, not rhinos, not Democrats, not liberals, not deep staters. After everything we've heard from Trump's team about how he knew it was a lie, he kept pushing, corruptly tried to steal an election. Will Republican voters say we've had enough, or will they continue to embrace it?
John King, I have a group of folks here who I'm sure you're familiar with, and we're going to all ask you some questions. I want to know from you, I'll introduce them in a moment, but is there anything that is unusual to you, especially considering Kansas? I've been watching your reporting. What about the turnout there? I'm hearing the turnout is really high, and that speaks to what is on the mind of Kansas voters, especially in a state as red as Kansas, that they're actually going to uphold abortion rights.
And so, again, this is a state that has a Democratic governor, but a Democratic governor who was a very conservative. This would not be someone who would win the governorship of Maryland or a very blue state. So here you have, again, we're only at 52%, so we need to count the vote. I think a key question tonight here in Kansas and around the country, you can't win Michigan in a close election without carrying the suburbs. You can't win Arizona in a close election without carrying the suburbs. Those key Senate races in places like Pennsylvania are going to come come down to the suburbs. Our suburban Republicans here in Lawrence, Kansas, Kansas City, Kansas, Topeka, Manhattan, are they telling the Republican Party, look, we don't like what the Supreme Court did, and we do not want you to try to build on it by banning abortion in the states? Restrictions on abortions, that is a conversation most Americans are open to. Outright bans on abortion, eliminating the exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. Kansas is going to send a message tonight. The question is, do anti-abortion Republicans in the states listen to this vote? And again, we're only at 52%. I want to be careful. There's a lot of rural Kansas. The vote is yet to come in. So this could tighten up considerably. The results actually could change. But that's the key question for Democrats. Democrats believe that in a year where the wind is in their face, it's a Democratic president, first midterm, history says the president's party suffers. The Democrats are looking for something to help them turn out voters and to peel back the suburban Republicans who revolted against Donald Trump, to peel back independents who might say, I don't like inflation, I don't think Biden's delivered. The Democrats believe the abortion issue could be a turnout mechanism and a vote-changing mechanism. Kansas is part of that test, Don.
Yeah. John, if you can just stay with us just for a little bit, as I want to bring in the folks in the room here with me in New York, and that is Abby Phillip, seen as David Chilling, Mark Preston, and David Axelrod as well. And so we're going to keep John for a little bit if you guys had any question. I was watching the Kansas results, and I found it interesting considering where we are. Look, it has not been called yet. As John said, there's a ways to go. And to think about what happened with the Erics. Any questions for John before we go? You guys do this all the time. I always find all of you very interesting, but John has the information coming straight from the magic wall here. Any questions?
I mean, we could ask John about the unbelievable baseball trade that occurred today with the Washington Nationals, which has a lot of us very upset. Right. And, you know, the Red Sox have made some
Is there anything unusual that, John, that you're seeing tonight that stands out to you as you're watching these results come in?
Well, another question, there's many layers of the Trump effect, if you will, the spread of, again, we need competitive political parties. We don't just want the Democratic Party in America, you need competitive political parties. The depth of the cancer in the Republican bloodstream about the big lie and the Trump effect, that's another thing being tested. And again, you were just talking to Sarah Murray about this race in Michigan. Let me bring up the state of Michigan and come on up. A number of primaries, but the one we're watching closely here is Peter Meyer, one of the 10 Republicans who voted to impeach Trump. Two more of them have primaries out in Washington State. The polls close out there in about an hour, Don. But look how close this is. John Gibbs is the Trump-endorsed candidate in this race. It's 50%, or round up to 51 if you want, to 50%. It's 253 votes at the moment, with about a third of the vote counted. Again, one of my big questions is, do Republicans continue to follow not so much Trump, but Trumpism, the big lie, that our elections are corrupt, that you cannot have disagreement within the party, at least not a disagreement with Donald Trump? Is that changing? Or are we going to continue that through November and beyond? That's one of the questions tonight. So this is one of the races I'm watching, and it's way too close to call right now. We're going to be counting votes there. And again, there's two more of those out in Washington State a bit later.
All right, John King, thanks. Abby, I want to get to you first here in the room. So many election deniers are up front and center in these primaries tonight. What stands out to you as you watch these results roll in so far?
That pretty much everyone is an election denier, even the ones who are not election deniers. It's sort of a watered down version of it. This is sort of the bare minimum line that you must cross to be on a Republican ballot virtually in this country at this point. Even when you look at someone like Tudor Dixon in the Michigan governor's race, she is a candidate who, kind of portrays herself as someone who is maybe more in the mainstream, but is more or less peddling a watered-down version of the big lie. Election integrity efforts, trying to make that the front and center of their race. And so that is what, to me, is something that we have to keep in mind here. There are some people who are on the far end of this, like Kari Lake, who doesn't believe that any election that she or Trump loses is legitimate. And then there are many others who are towing that line. Even Kari Lake's opponent, she was on CNN talking to Breonna Keeler just a few days ago, Karen Taylor Robson, and she didn't really want to say whether Joe Biden was legitimately elected president of the United States. That should tell you everything you need to know about how Republican candidates feel like they need to position themselves to even have a shot of their party's nomination.
But it's an interesting way how they dance around that.
Yeah, and to your point about Tudor Dixon, I mean, as recently as May, when she thought she was in a very competitive Republican primary, she was pretty adamant that Donald Trump had won the state of Michigan. Newsflash, he did not. Okay. only as she got Trump's endorsement, she coalesced the DeVos family money, Betsy DeVos, the education secretary, her family there. She had sort of the Chamber of Commerce crowd and the Trump crowd. And then she started softening when she realized, she really was, as she did, win tonight and in position to win, and understanding, as she's going to now head into a general election, that perhaps she wants to sort of shade that a little bit and not be so adamant. And that dance that they do, that is going to be a very, very tricky proposition.
Yes, well, we saw this last year in Virginia, right, where Glenn Youngkin, who ended up getting elected governor of Virginia, was much more amenable to the idea that something was amiss, was much more amenable to Trump generally. And as soon as he secured the nomination, which didn't require a primary, he very quickly shifted away from that.
And it worked for him.
It did work for him. And the question is that what we're going to see with these candidates who aren't outright declarers of election, but once they have the threat of Trump in a primary in their rearview mirror, do they think they have to get well with voters by moving away from this position?
I feel like it only works, right, if they can focus on other issues. Because, I mean, for example, Glenn Youngkin was able to sort of pivot to education, pivot to sort of cultural issues. The task this cycle will be the economy. Can Republicans make that pivot? If things start to improve for Democrats on the economy, on this abortion issue, on guns, I think it's a different environment.
Yeah, but they're going to be told, too. The consultant class is going to tell them, listen, as we're going into the general election, just talk about inflation, talk about job creation, talk about the fact that interest rates are increasing right now. But I don't think as long as Donald Trump is the de facto head of the Republican Party that you're going to see folks distance themselves from him because they realize they need him. But once he is gone, when he is no longer, there with his long shadow cast over everything, I do think you'll see Republicans start to come back to reality.
I appreciate that you use the words consultant and class in the same sentence.
I didn't say class.
I don't often hear that.
But does that dance work? I mean, are you going to have to pick whether you're going to lead or follow in that dance, or whether it's a foxtrot or a waltz? I mean, they're going to have to make a decision when it comes to November.
Yeah, they're going to do it depending on whatever state that they're in. Quite frankly, is going to tailor their message.
It's a swing state.
Yeah, and how much Trump is going to be part of their campaign or not part of their campaign.
Which is why, by the way, the whole conversation, sorry, David, about Donald Trump threatening to announce a presidential campaign is something that many Republicans overseeing these campaigns, trying to win majorities in Congress, do not want to see at all, because they understand the moment he injects himself, then the conversation about the economy gets a lot more muted, which is what they want to be running on.
All right, everybody, stick around. We have a lot more to talk about. Lots more results coming in primaries across the country tonight. Plus, first on CNN, more missing texts. And now it is the Pentagon, what they say happened and what it means for the investigation. We'll be right back. All right, it is election night in America, and we're back with early results coming in from key primaries in 5 states tonight. So how will all of this shape the upcoming midterms? Back with me now, Abby Phillip, David Chalian, Mark Preston, and David Axelrod. Let's get back to what we're talking about in Kansas and what's happening with abortion there. It's on the ballot for the first time, right? And since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, this referendum that's on the ballot in Kansas, the turnout is amazing. Is this possibly an overreach? I should say it is an unusual turnout for this.
Yes.
Is it possible overreach from the Republicans?
I think the turnout tells us that people care.
Yeah.
They care on both sides of the issue, so we'll see how it turns out. But that is critically important. But the polling on abortion is actually very clear on this issue. Like, Americans, by and large, support some abortion rights in this country. But what has been happening recently is that you're seeing Republicans moving in Midwestern states and southern states to outlaw virtually all abortions. And this Kansas referendum really puts that question to the American voter and asks them, do you agree with that idea that virtually all abortions could or should be outlawed? And the answer to that is going to be critically important, because it's not true, as some Republicans are saying, that is not what is being attempted. That is what is being attempted. And while a lot of Americans, maybe they support some restrictions, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, 22 weeks, what have you, The polling is very clear
Yeah.
that there is not support for full bans on abortion.
And it's so important, this result tonight, because it's not polling, right? It's going to be the first electoral proof, if indeed the abortion rights side wins. This will be the first, post Roe being overturned, electoral proof of all that we've seen in the polling. And it's also the electoral proof of why, when the Dobbs decision came down, a lot of the Republican leadership was sort of advising their candidates, don't go out there and talking about abortion. Keep the focus on the economy, because they understood this dynamic.
I'll tell you one place where they're going to watch this very closely is the state of Michigan, where Governor Whitmer's opponent may be Tudor Dixon, who seems to be ahead right now. And she's been a full-throated advocate for a no restrictions approach to abortion. They have their own constitutional amendment initiative on the ballot for November that would essentially enshrine abortion rights in the state constitution. So this is going to be a huge issue, and I would expect that if Tudor Dixon is the nominee tonight, she will celebrate and wake up tomorrow or the next day to ads with video of her position on this issue, because it's not going to be a winning issue in the state of Michigan.
As I am watching and reading and listening to conservative commentators and political pundits, the question seems to be, well, is a question right on the ballot? Look, we don't know what's going to happen in Kansas, but the results that are in now, they're like, is a question, were people confused about the question? Like
I think it was, there's always a question whenever you're putting anything on a ballot about whether it's confusing or not confusing, about whether it's worded in a way.
Confusing because the results are not going in the way that they thought that they were.
Well, okay, so they're looking for an excuse because it didn't go their
Right.
way. I would say, just reading that, it was a pretty basic question that's on the ballot. I mean, do you support, outlawing abortions in the state? Yes or no, basically, is what it says. You know what's interesting about this for Democrats, by and large? Republicans are going to be happy about what happened in Missouri tonight, right? Greitens goes down, Schmidt is up. Republicans feel like they may be able to take back the Senate. But if you go back to what John King was saying earlier, and he's right about elections are won in the suburbs, if you look at a state like Georgia, which is very much a southern state but has become a northern state, there's a lot of business that has moved out of the Northeast that has gone down to the northern suburbs of Atlanta, and it is really turning over what has been a conservative place. In that Senate race, perhaps in the governor's race, in Georgia, will we see women, even more centrist Republican women, come out and support the Democratic nominee because of the concern on abortion? And can we see that happen in Pennsylvania?
Well, and also in Arizona, Maricopa County is a huge part of the entire state electorate. And, this could be very important for Kelly in terms of Democrats retaining that seat. On your question about the initiative, Don, and Abby and I were talking about this earlier today, the thing about initiatives is when if there is confusion, the default position for people tends to be no. Mm-hmm. And in this particular case, the yes side was, yes, we want to essentially allow the Constitution to be changed so abortion can be restricted. And so they started off with a burden there. And I think if there was confusion, it probably helped the pro-abortion rights side turn this back, if that's indeed what happened.
Yeah, I think Mark is right, though. This will hinge on women. A lot of it will hinge on women in the suburbs. And as you said, most people would like some sort of restrictions on abortion, but not necessarily an outright ban on it. That's where the country
I mean, the outright bans are stepping further than where the voters have been for a very long time. I'm not talking about the last 5 years. I mean, the polling on this has been relatively stable, in fact, moving in the direction of abortion rights in this country for decades. So that's where we are. What are women going to do? When we talk about Arizona, what are young voters going to do? Arizona is a state where, there are a lot of young Latinos who are eligible to vote and who tend to lean Democratic. It probably gave Joe Biden a bit of an edge in 2020. What are those younger voters going to do who spent their whole lives in a world in which Roe v. Wade was law of the land? These are some of the big questions going into November. They are the wild cards in this race. And even Republicans will acknowledge that that when you look at states like Oklahoma, where the governor there says we want to ban all abortions in the state and has done so virtually, it's not hypothetical anymore. It actually has happened, and voters are now evaluating the things that are actually happening and making determinations about whether that's what they want to see.
And I should say again, the results are still coming in Kansas. I'm not sure if we haven't, we can show. But again, at this point in the evening, when you look at this referendum or what's happening now, to have in the 60s abortion rights being protected in Kansas so far. Again, it's not the final results, but I think it's pretty striking. To see what's happening there. So stick around, everyone. Thanks so much. More missing texts. This time from top Trump officials at the Department of Defense, and that comes on top of the continuing scandal over missing Secret Service text messages. What's all going down? What's it going to mean for the January 6th investigation? We'll discuss right after this. Can someone please explain what's going on with all of these missing texts? First on CNN, the cell phones of several senior Defense Department and U.S. military officials were wiped when those officials left their posts at the end of the Trump administration. And that means that texts that might have been sent or received on January 6th have all been deleted. A watchdog group called American Oversight is seeking January 6th data from former Acting Secretary of Defense Chris Miller, former Chief of Staff Kash Patel, and former Secretary of the Army Ryan McCarthy, among other Pentagon officials. CNN learning this from court filings. So let's discuss now with CNN senior law enforcement analyst Andrew McCabe. Andrew, what's up here? What is going on?
Well, Don, apparently what we have is an instance where not one, not two, but three separate government agencies are all allowing senior officials to leave their posts, walk out the door, and not preserving their communications, their records on their cell phones in a way that's required by the Federal Records Act. It's an extraordinary coincidence, maybe not. One that also speaks of potentially a intentional effort to destroy records of senior officials as they're walking out the door. So we don't really know what we have yet.
There's no suggestion that these officials themselves erased these records. But when you look at it, look at the people here: Miller, Patel, McCarthy, crucial witnesses in the government's response to January 6th. I mean, there's a lot of questions here.
That's absolutely right, Don. And, I know, as having been a senior official in a federal government agency for quite some time, it is, you are routinely briefed by security officials on the fact that after you've reached a certain level in a government agency, your records have to be preserved. The things you write, the things that you read, the notes you take, your emails and your text messages should be preserved and sent to the National Archives. And the fact that the Department of Defense doesn't have a system in place to do this is I can't believe that that's the case.
I'm glad you said that, because again, we are talking about the Department of Defense. I mean, add these missing Pentagon records to other stories that we have talked about over the last few weeks: missing texts from DHS officials and the missing Secret Service texts. Look, again, as we said, no one is saying there's anything nefarious going on here, but it's one of those things that make you go, I mean, it's hard to believe it's all a coincidence.
And shouldn't we be looking more broadly? How about everyone else at the cabinet level that served in the Trump administration, many of whom resigned supposedly in disgust on or near shortly after January 6th, Betsy DeVos, Elaine Chao, others? What happened to their records? Is it routine that cabinet level officials resign and then somebody just, wipes their phone as if they were like the supervisor of the motor pool or something? It's ridiculous. And I think there needs to be an investigation to see how members of that administration were living up to or not their responsibilities to preserve their records.
And digging in more on what happened at the Pentagon surrounding the Capitol, I want you to listen. This is a testimony from the former Acting Defense Secretary Chris Miller about any plans to have troops deployed on January 6th. Here it is.
Obviously have plans for activating more folks, but that was not anything more than contingency planning. There was no official message traffic or anything of that nature regarding.
Just so we're clear, you did not have 10,000 troops or to be on the ready for January 6th. prior to January 6th?
A non-military person probably could have some sort of weird interpretation, but no, to answer your question, no.
So why is it so important to get to the bottom of what communications there were about deploying troops that day, Andrew?
So, Don, forget about all the other reasons we're interested in January 6th. Let's just talk about how did our agencies perform on that day. And it is a very normal and responsible thing to go back after the fact and investigate through an inspector general or another other entity to see, did people do the right thing? Were we adequately prepared? What did we know and what steps did we take to prevent, I don't know, an attack on the Capitol? And now, essentially, you can't do that because a large tranche of the sort of records that would preserve what people thought, who they talked to, steps they took, is gone forever, those records having been lost when the cell phones were turned in and wiped. So it obstructs our ability to figure out how well the agencies are performing, and therefore prevents them from ever learning from this episode and doing it better in the future. And that is truly concerning, should be concerning to every citizen.
Andrew McCabe, thank you, sir. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Don.
When we come back, we're going to have results on the Kansas initiative on abortion right after this. We have more primary results coming in tonight. In Kansas, voters maintaining the right to abortion. I want you to take a look at our vote on your screen right now. Look at that, 61.8% to 38.1%, 78% of the votes in. And so I want to get to John King, Nick Valencia, Abby Phillip here to digest this and talk about it. John, to you first. We were just talking about Kansas at the top of the show, at the top of the hour. Kansas is the first state to let voters weigh in on abortion post-Roe. What are the results there?
In the very first, it's a statewide referendum. Should we change the state constitution was the question for Kansas voters. Again, this is a red state, a Democratic governor, but a conservative state in the middle of America. And by a pretty healthy margin, the citizens of Kansas are saying no. No, our state constitution right now guarantees the right to an abortion, and they don't want to change it. They do not want to open it up, if you will, to let the legislature consider a total ban on abortion or more restrictions on abortion. We'll watch how the vote plays out. But it's significant, number one, this is happening in the conservative heartland of America. Significant, number two, Don, that it is the first ballot initiative, the first time the voters get to speak directly to the Supreme Court decision, wiping out Roe, putting Dobbs in place. Now, where do we go from here? That is a debate you can have with my colleagues. It's also a debate we will watch play out in races for governor, in races for Congress, House and the Senate, as some Republicans say they would like a national ban. Other Republicans say we should do this state by state. But again, in a pretty conservative state, let's go back to 2020, Donald Trump 56, Joe Biden 41. Wow. Look at this part of the state here. You do have 5 counties here where Joe Biden did carry the state. So when you come back to the ballot initiative now and you look, it is the eastern part of the state largely, the suburbs. Again, I say this too many times. I'm like a broken record, but I say it because it's true. The suburbs in America decide close elections. The suburbs in America, Kansas isn't close. Most of the elections in Kansas aren't close. The governor's race might be this time, but this is not all that close as we count the rest of the votes. 62% to 38%. The citizens of Kansas saying we do not want to open up our state constitution. So it's a defeat for abortion opponents. It's a victory for abortion rights activists. And Democrats believe this is potentially a sign for them that they can motivate not only Democratic base voters, but suburban Republicans who might be more moderate, might be more opening, like they did when they ran away from Donald Trump and voted for Joe Biden. So Democrats think the turnout here could be a healthy sign for them heading into November. But just on the basics of this, the first time the voters got to say what they think, that's a pretty loud message from Kansas.
We'll get to Nick in a moment. Abby, I want to get your reaction to this. I mean, John, it was a very good question. What does this mean? What happens now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty seismic moment for this question of where do voters stand on this issue? I mean, think about Kansas. Kansas is a conservative part of the country, and it is surrounded by other conservative states that have virtually banned all abortions. Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, you name it, virtually banned abortions. And Kansas remains a place where voters are saying, we don't want to join them. And I think that that really says a lot about what happens when you just take the question and put it to the voters and have them give a yes or no. And as I've said repeatedly, the polling is not ambiguous on this question. A majority of Americans, more than 50%, more than 60%, in some polls, 70%, do not support outright bans on all abortions in this country. And so we've not had many opportunities to see what that looks like when voters get to decide, but this is one of them. And it should be potentially a warning sign, not just to national Republicans, but to statewide Republicans. We're talking about states like Michigan and Pennsylvania and others where this very same question could come up for lawmakers, for the governors, and in the case of Michigan, even for voters. And it will be important for them to see what happens when you put it to voters and when you put it to women who overwhelmingly support some rights to abortion in this country.
Nick Valencia is following the story from the ground in Kansas tonight. Nick, what are you seeing? What are you hearing?
Well, Don, this is a major upset victory for abortion rights advocates, not just here in Kansas, but beyond. We spoke last week to Kansans for Constitutional Freedom. That's the main coalition of abortion rights advocates that were pushing out Get Out the Vote, trying to educate voters here. They felt that they were fighting an uphill battle because of the ambiguous wording of this amendment. A yes vote would have stripped protections for abortion rights. A no vote would have maintained the status quo of what the 2019 Kansas Supreme Court put forward. But also, it was on a primary ballot, which is where we know that Republicans historically are more likely to vote and lower voter turnout. We saw a high voter turnout in counties across the state. And this Kansans for Constitutional Freedom, they are elated. We are dipping in on their watch party to see their reaction here, and they think that this is a huge victory for their movement here and also signals a sign to the rest of the country. The referendum that would have weakened abortion access in this state has failed, handing a devastating loss to the pro-life movement here.
All right, we're going to continue to follow. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Abby. John King as well. More to cover. We're going to talk about Nancy Pelosi meeting with Taiwan's president just moments ago in the midst of China's threats of retaliation over her visit. We're going to go there live next. The House Speaker Nancy Pelosi speaking last hour in Taiwan as part of her Asia tour this week. Pelosi delivering the remarks despite China's escalating threats of retaliation over her visit. For more, I want to bring in now CNN's Will Ripley. He's live for us from Taipei. Will, good morning to you there. Thanks for joining. What is the House Speaker's message tonight? Is she responding to the tensions with China?
Hi, Don. She's really trying to underscore, the difference between what we're seeing out of China and what we're seeing from the United States. Nancy Pelosi said she is here to show solidarity with the people of Taiwan, almost 24 million people who are under an increasing threat from mainland China in terms of military intimidation, economic and diplomatic intimidation. And so she's coming here knowing that China has been, warning against it for weeks. And she spoke to Parliament and talked about how the shared values between Taiwan and the United States, values like democracy, like inclusion, progressive values that she, of course, holds dear to her heart. She is here to underscore the commitment, at least on the part of her and her supporters, and it's really bipartisan support, Don, to stand with Taiwan in the face of this growing threat. And she just received an award as well, the Order of Propitious Clouds. Do you know what that word means? Propitious.
Not propitia.
Propitious. It means, yeah, right, that's what I thought too. The hair, over 40, the hair starts to go. Yeah, but it means to bring about good fortune.
Okay.
Bring about good fortune.
So let's talk about Beijing. Why is Beijing so deeply unhappy with this visit, Will?
Well, because they look at Taiwan as just another Chinese province that just happens to have not had the communist rulers running it for the last 70-plus years. They have, what Beijing considers an illegitimate government, a renegade government. Of course, Taiwan has a democratic system. The people here elected now on her second term, Taiwan's president, Tsai Ing-wen, a president that Xi Jinping does not acknowledge. He thinks that he, as the ruler of China, is also the ruler of Taiwan, and he has said repeatedly that he will bring this island back into the, as they call it, the motherland. They use the word reunified, but the communist rulers in Beijing have never once governed this island since the end of China's civil war. And Taiwan says they have a military, they have their own government. They act as if they're a sovereign nation, but because China basically has bullied them economically and also diplomatically. Most countries around the world don't officially recognize Taiwan as a country, but a lot of democracies do have friendships and economic relationships with Taiwan, and that's why they're hoping that Nancy Pelosi being here, that she'll be able to take what she learns here about Taiwan's democracy, bring it back to Washington, and that it might help shape policy decisions if Taiwan does need help from the United States and international community if China does make a move.
Well, Ripley, propitious. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. We've got more coming up on key primaries tonight, like Arizona, where election deniers are all over the ballot. That's next. So this is just into CNN. A source confirming to CNN a federal grand jury investigating January 6th has subpoenaed the former White House counsel, Pat Cipollone. ABC News was first to report that. CNN has now confirmed that as well. Abby Phillip, David Chalian, Mark Preston, David Axelrod are all back with me here. Thanks so much for joining. This is big news. What say you, David Chalian?
Well, I think we've seen over the last couple of weeks this escalation in this grand jury process that is separate and apart from all of the DOJ investigations and prosecutions into those that actually stormed the Capitol and broke into the Capitol. This is now, has been, and we've seen, as Pence aides have been called in and what have you, getting into the inner sanctum. Well, you don't get more inner sanctum than the White House counsel, who we know through testimony given to the January 6th committee, was running down the hall to the Oval Office to try and stop meetings from progressing, who was trying to get the White House chief of staff alive and awakened and engaged in what was going on the 6th. So I know that Cipollone and his team are going to go through a whole host of negotiations and conversations with DOJ about what he could say or what he can't say. But this is DOJ investigation and this subpoena of Cipollone. This is as serious as a heart attack. I don't think DOJ is fooling around here at all. And I think this is going to be an investigation that is going to be with us for quite some time.
There was a negotiation with the House committee because the House is racing a clock. They needed to get what they're going to do done because they were concerned about the Congress turning over in January. The Justice Department will pursue him, and they're going to test this issue of privilege because there is no privilege if it relates to the commission of a crime. And they will pursue it in a way that the House cannot.
And I think the question going forward will be when they do pursue it and it goes to the courts, how quickly does it get resolved? Even in these federal probes, is in the past, some of the judges and some courts have taken a long time to come down in rulings about whether or not privilege applies to certain circumstances. A court that moves much more quickly could have this moving along. And I think either way, though, it puts Cipollone in a position that he wasn't in with the January 6th committee. He basically was able to go into a room with the January 6th committee and say, here's what I'm willing to talk about, here's what I'm not. And they were amenable to that. But it's not going to be that kind of situation when you're talking about a federal grand jury and when you're talking about federal crimes.
Well, you guys are right. Hold on, Mark. You guys are right because they said that what ABC News is reporting, that attorneys for Cipollone, they're going to try to negotiate this like they did with the House Select Committee investigating the attack, which you mentioned here. They're expected to engage in these negotiations around any appearance while weighing concerns regarding potential claims of executive privilege. So you're going to have that dance.
As they should, though. I mean, for somebody who was, who's been in the West Wing and has been in that situation, like there has to be some kind of privilege given to
that he is the former White House counsel.
Right, but to David's point, if there is a crime being commissioned, then there is no executive privilege. And what's interesting about Cipollone is that he's not a MAGA guy. He is somebody who took a job, went in and did it, and was very open with the January 6th committee, which I was kind of surprised. I mean, again, he went and negotiated it out, but to have him come in and say some of the things that he did on videotape that were showed, during the hearings was amazing, I thought, and really helped make their case.
I want to get some legal analysis now when Ellie Honig joins us now. Ellie, when you look at what's happening now, Pat Cipollone, a federal grand jury subpoenaed the former Trump White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, for this investigation into January 6th. What does this mean?
Well, Don, Pat Cipollone is the ultimate insider, and I think we've seen that he was involved in or present for or a witness for so many of the key conversations. And generally speaking, his role was as a voice of reason, telling them, no, you can't take over the Justice Department. No, you can't get on board with this fake elector scheme. No, John Eastman's theories are not legal. They're not constitutional. And I think one of the big questions here, and I think Abby Phillip was just alluding to this, is how hard is DOJ going to push back against these executive privilege claims? Because if we think to Pat Cipollone's videotape deposition testimony, which we saw in some of the hearings, there were these moments where he was asked, what was your conversation with Donald Trump? Pat Cipollone would sort of pause, turn to his lawyer, a guy named Michael Purpura, who I used to work with at DOJ, and then Cipollone would just say, privilege, and he would not answer. So is DOJ willing to go to courts to force him to give those answers, or are they going to be able to negotiate some sort of point where they agree on what Cipollone will and won't give them? If they do go to the courts, though, A, that's going to be a very high-stakes battle, and B, that could take quite a while. That could take months
Ellie,
and months.
I mean, this does escalate. This takes it to a whole new level. I mean, if you have the former White House counsel being subpoenaed here, this really ratchets things up.
Yeah. There's no question about it. I mean, when we add this to what we already know about who the committee is speaking with, I mean, this is a next level up from Mark Short, from Greg Jacob. This is the White House counsel. He's in all the rooms for all the big meetings. So this is, yes, another sign of just how serious and how focused DOJ is on not just the White House, but the inner sanctum of the Trump White House.
All right. Ellie, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Again, the news that we're reporting, CNN is confirming, ABC News, the first to report, a federal grand jury has subpoenaed the former Trump White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, in its investigation into January 6th. We'll continue to follow this just into CNN. But this is election night in America, and we need to talk about that because the results are coming in at this hour in 5 key states, including Arizona, where election deniers are all over the ballot. Huge news out of Kansas, voters rejecting an amendment that would have weakened the right to abortion under that state's constitution. I want to get to CNN's John King. He's at the Magic Wall for us. John, good evening to you. What stands out to you at this hour?
Well, we're beginning to get some votes out on the West Coast as you move to the West, including the Arizona governor's race. So let me just give you that to give you the update of the new votes. Karen Taylor Robeson, she's the more establishment candidate. Mike Pence endorsed her. Carrie Lake is the Trump-endorsed candidate who says if she loses tonight, there must be cheating going on. About half of the vote counted so far, so we got a long way to go. But right now, Karen Taylor Robeson, the establishment candidate, is leading 50% if you round that up to 41% if you round that up. She's leading because of this lead in Maricopa County, the largest county in the state, Don. 60%, more than 60% of the state population lives in Phoenix and the suburbs around it in Maricopa County. So Karen Taylor Robeson taking an early lead there. Very significant because there is a possibility if Carrie Lake wins, and if you look down ballot in Arizona, it's possible the Republicans could nominate a statewide slate of election deniers. Robeson, not one of them, although she has been softer on the question in the past. So that's just one of the things we're watching. A minute ago, you mentioned the Kansas vote, which we have called this of national significance. This is a state constitutional ballot initiative in Kansas, but of national significance because in the first time voters get their say, post-Dobbs, meaning in post-Roe v. Wade America, where the Supreme Court says states now can decide to ban abortions, the voters of Kansas are saying, no, they do not want to water down their state constitution, which protects abortion rights. So a significant development in Kansas, but also, Don, one with national implications as state by state goes through the abortion debate, and as Democrats hope that the Supreme Court decision, a setback for Democrats, pro-abortion rights Democrats, ends up being a motivation for voters come November.
All right, Mr. King, stand by. I want to get to CNN's Kyung Law. She is in Arizona, where the latest is happening with the key races there. The votes are starting to come in. What do you have for us, Kyung?
Well, you can start to see some of the people in this room, and I am with Karen Taylor Robeson. This is her watch party. Some applause starting to pop in this room as these numbers are trickling in. What the campaign was specifically looking for is that margin that John was just talking about. It's about a 9% margin. The campaign was hoping for that kind of a number. The expectation is that Carrie Lake, who had been encouraging her voters to vote on Election Day, that if Robeson had any chance of winning, she needed to have a significant margin in that first election result, the first one that we're seeing tonight. So this room at least is sounding pleased as they're starting to hear about these results. But as John pointed out, and it is very early, there are still a lot of votes to be counted, especially those votes that came in today that were voting in person, Don.
The noise level has certainly increased since.
Start trickling in now.
The noise level has certainly increased since last week we met you at the headquarters there for Robeson. What are you hearing? Are you able to talk to any of the voters?
We haven't talked to many of the voters here yet because these results are just coming in right now. What I can tell you, though, is that you can feel the mood in this room. There was this feeling of we're holding our breath. So much is at stake if you talk to the people in this room. This is the Republican establishment. This is the heart of what has long been known as the Arizona Republican Party, the framework of it being the party of Barry Goldwater, of John McCain, and Doug Ducey as of late. Ducey, Mike Pence, they came out for Karen Taylor Robeson, the establishment candidate. This group is not sure if she would be able to pull it off. And that is still out. There's still a lot of nerves here. They do not know what's going to happen as these results start to come out. Again, very early in the night, the first, election results, some positive signs there. But again, very, very early in the debate.
I hope you got the Java ready because you're going to need it, Kyung Law. Thank you very much, Kyung Law, joining us from Arizona there. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Listen, I got my dream team here on the set, and we're going to continue to talk about what's happening. We're going to take a quick break, though, okay? When we come right back, January 6th news tonight, a source confirming to CNN that a federal grand jury investigating January 6th has subpoenaed the former White House counsel, Pat Cipollone. All right, and we're back now. Election night in America results are coming in. CNN's John King at the Magic Wall looking at all of the key races for us tonight. So, John, talk to me. Can we go to Michigan and talk about what's happening there with Peter Meijer?
We can go to Michigan. You ask about Peter Meijer. For those at home who might not recognize the name, one of the 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump. John Gibbs is the Trump-endorsed opponent as Donald Trump seeks vengeance. We've seen this in races with the Republicans he opposes. Look how close this is. Peter Meijer right now ahead, Don, by 248 votes, 50.2 to 49.7. This is a district, Grand Rapids, and then to the west, to the border in Michigan. Yeah, we're going to be counting these for a while. That's we think about 63% of the vote coming in. So you've got, 4 in 10 votes still to count, a little shorter than that, and a 248 vote margin right now. This one of 3 tests tonight. There are 2 primaries out in Washington State as well. The polls just starting to close out there. 3 of the 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump are being challenged, and Trump has endorsed their opponents. It's essentially the Trump vengeance tour through the Republican Party. This one might not be settled tonight, but we're still counting votes. 248 votes right now. Peter Meijer holding on. Democrats, Don, interestingly, they actually put some money in behind John Gibbs. They wanted him to be the nominee. They think they might have a chance to take this seat in November if John Gibbs is the nominee. But we'll see. We'll be counting votes here, and then those 2 contests out in Washington State as well.
Mr. John King, thank you very much. Just bring it to the floor, to the room, as they say. Let's talk about Peter Meijer and talk about all of these, what's happening with these 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach Trump, facing a far-right primary challenger who Democrats have propped up. But I think what's interesting, we were talking in the break about what's happening with Peter Meijer, and this could be a real test or not such a great night when it comes to Peter Meijer and Donald Trump.
Well, right. I mean, obviously, Donald Trump has a little scoreboard of all these folks he's trying to exact vengeance against who voted to impeach him in the aftermath of January 6th. Peter Meijer, one of them. John King was saying people at home may not know Meijer. You know where you know the name Meijer? In Michigan, because it's like all the supermarket chains. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But he is a Republican in a different mold than the modern-day Trump-dominated Republican Party. And he has been sort of fighting that fight. And if he is able to successfully withstand this challenge from a Trump-backed challenger, John Gibbs, who served in Trump's HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Department, this will be sort of the first pushback on that vengeance tour that we see in this primary season in the Republican Party. And by the way, what the Democrats did in this race, it could, look how close it is, could really potentially be a factor here. David, I know you're no fan of what Democrats have done because you think they're playing with fire here.
It's not just playing with fire. I think when a person puts their career on the line, to vote for impeachment, knowing that Trump's going to come after them and that it may end, he's a very young man, end his career, that Democrats should not be meddling to lift an election denier in a primary against him. I don't think that, if you want to be the pro-democracy party, then don't go after a guy in his own primary for standing up for democracy. If you want to compete with him in a general election.
But should they be supporting him?
No, I mean, I think that there are real differences philosophically between Peter Meyer and Democrats. But it isn't over the issue of democracy. And by lifting up an election denier against him and punishing him, essentially punishing him for taking a pro-democracy position, I think Democrats, call into question their own commitment.
Yeah, it's a cynical move, I mean, on the Democrats' part. And to your point, Don, I mean, there was a time when, this was a political tactic that was sort of just about, oh, you prefer to run against this guy who feels this way about taxes and not that guy. But Democrats are the ones who are making an argument to voters that this is an existential threat to our democratic system. And it's hard to make that case to voters on the one hand, and then on the other hand, spend tons of money boosting people who are election deniers. And it's a repudiation of that in this particular race. But I think also one of the problems with that strategy beyond this race is that some of these people can win.
Yeah, well, that's the playing with
some of
fire
these people
point.
might actually win, and you cannot guarantee that voters are just going to reject them because you think that they are too radical to be elected.
The one thing I will say is what Democrats are doing are running ads in Republican primaries saying this candidate is too conservative about the opponent to the person they're trying to beat. He's pro-Trump, he's an election denier, and so on. And there's a market for that in the Republican primaries. If there weren't a market for it, it wouldn't work. So, I mean, they are playing with fire. There are primal forces there that they're playing with. That has to be noted. But absolutely, one of these scuds could get through. One of these anti-democracy scuds could get through. And if Meyer were to lose this race tonight, and he absolutely still could, Democrats can claim that they defeated him. Is that a victory that they want to claim?
It's interesting because they're still talking about impeachment. I guess it still does play, in Kansas or whatever, when they say, or in Peoria or wherever. That's still a factor for the Trump voter.
Yeah, it does. There's definitely no honor in politics necessarily, but I do think over the past 20 years we have seen whatever honor that was in politics has kind of drifted away. And to David's point, about the Democratic Party getting involved in these primaries, it wouldn't be a historic first for major Democratic leaders to stay out of certain races. We see it in congressional delegations where Harry Reid, God rest his soul, but Harry Reid specifically wouldn't get involved in primaries in his own state. Even though he was a Senate Democratic leader, he wouldn't get involved in that because he didn't feel that it was appropriate for him to do so. To David's point, how does the Democratic Party look at itself when it is propping up election deniers? The goal of trying to beat them in the end, but could still lose. It's just...
One quick point on your impeachment point. One person who is trailing tonight is Rusty Bowers, who we all know played such a significant role in these hearings, the former Speaker of the Arizona House who's running for the state Senate today, losing, trailing, and that is completely about impeachment. He's represented that area forever. The Republican Party of Arizona censured him in the last weeks of the campaign just to make the point that he was an apostate because he stood up for democracy even though it might hurt Donald Trump.
Yeah. Stick around, everyone. We've got much more to come. Maybe the biggest result of the night in Kansas, voters maintaining the right to abortion in the Kansas state constitution. So Kansas voters have decided to maintain the right to an abortion in their state's constitution. That, according to the projection from the CNN Decision Desk, It's up on your screen now. Take a look at it. Back with me now, Abby, David, Mark, and David.
Not enough
How many
Davids.
Davids do I have? We've got all about David tonight. But also joining us all about right now, Ariba Martin, who's our CNN legal analyst, to walk us through this. So, Ariba, thanks for joining us here. What do you make of this? It's surprising to me, considering that this is Kansas, right? Red, middle of the country. So, is this a harbinger of things to come for, you think, for Republicans come November? Too early to tell?
I think it is, Don. I think what it tells us is that abortion is on the ballot. Kansas saw record turnout in this election. They talked about this being comparable to 2008 when Obama was on the ballot. Even if voters are not pro-abortion, I think voters are saying we are anti-extremism by Republican lawmakers that are seeking to deny women the rights to make decisions about their own reproductive health. And I think this is going to be a difficult issue for Republicans moving forward. Voters are galvanized around this issue to support and to protect women's right to choose. And they rejected this constitutional amendment, which would have given Republican lawmakers in the state of Kansas the right, it would have given them the power and authority to make decisions about whether abortions would be banned in that state. And everyone expected that if they were given that authority, they would have absolutely banned or severely restricted abortions in the state of Kansas. So this is a big win for women, a big win for pro-choice advocates.
But there is some history to this, Ariva, because this vote comes out. There was a 2019 state Supreme Court ruling in Kansas that found that the state constitution does protect the right to an abortion. That was a 6-1 decision.
Absolutely. That's why this amendment, it's not surprising to me that the voters in Kansas rejected the amendment to try to remove this constitutional protection under the Kansas Constitution, because the Supreme Court in Kansas had already spoken, had already said that this constitutional protection was valid, and the voters in Kansas today confirmed that women should have the right to choose in that state.
So listen, back to the floor here. There's going to be this consternation about, the language was ambiguous. We were talking about it when we had Nick Valencia on, who was there. And I heard, as I said, I was listening to conservative pundits, either on radio or on television, saying, well, were voters confused? They seemed to like flummox that, that Kansas could vote in the way that they were voting, that it was looking like it was going. It doesn't seem that it was ambiguous to me. Is that just an excuse?
Look, I mean, I think that given it's a couple things here. One, the result at the moment is pretty lopsided, okay, for what it is, 88% in. But the other thing is that with turnout being extremely high in an off-year scenario, if you are leaving your house to go vote on a ballot initiative in the state of Kansas, you probably know what you're voting about. And I think that that's, in this case, they were asking voters, do you want to change the status quo or leave the status quo? If you're leaving your house, you're probably gonna leave your house to keep the status quo that you have been living under. So I think that we can only surmise that is what is going on here, just given how lopsided the numbers are and given the turnout levels. And then one other point I'll make, the state of Kansas, their governor, Laura Kelly, is a Democrat. She is a Democrat who has pushed back on abortion restrictions in the past and is not backing down now. She's up for re-election. That is, I think, in and of itself, something extraordinary, but it tells you a lot about how she thinks this issue can play, even in her state where Trump won by a very large margin. She is describing it as an extremist effort, as an effort being pushed by a small minority of even the Republican Party to further restrict abortion. And that's a warning shot that she is sending to Republicans.
It'll be interesting to see if there's a delta between the number of people who voted on this initiative and voted on other races, whether there are people who just came out to vote on these races. But Don, this is the turnout is everything here. The reason parties in power almost always lose ground in midterm elections is because the party that's out of power comes out in greater numbers than the party in power. If Democrats are motivated by this decision to come out in unusually large numbers, and we saw something like, we saw a huge turnout in 2018, but Trump was president. if this becomes a motivator, it will have an impact on some of these races. It may not change the fundamental point that it's going to be a tough Democratic year, but it could be a lot less tough because of this.
You don't have just, I don't think you just have Democrats voting on this particular issue.
Absolutely.
Because Republicans, especially
Absolutely.
Republican women, feel like this is an issue.
But if they feel that that is at stake in these Senate races, for example, if you've got an ardent, or a governor's race in particular, ardently anti-abortion rights candidate on one side and a pro-abortion rights candidate on the other side, those moderate Republicans may go that way. Independent voters may go that way.
I think it's such an important point you're making, David, because we have, for much of this year, seen where the president's polling numbers are. We see how much harm inflation is causing families and the real concern. We see an electorate that is not pleased with the direction of the country. All of these things that tell us this should be like a wave year for Republicans. And what we're starting to see are some data points that suggest, again, not that the environment is overturned. This should be a good Republican year. But there are some data points here that perhaps that wave is not going to crest quite as high as a lot of folks had initially thought. And this Kansas vote is one of those data points. The rallying around what you're seeing and sort of organizing around the states around the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe. We see it here play out in Kansas, but you're seeing the organizational efforts elsewhere, and it is going to become, you can tell from what Democratic candidates are doing tonight in response to this, they're going to centralize this as a part of their campaigns in some very key contests. And as John was saying, if you can bring back enough of the independents that were so repelled by Trump,
yes,
you can actually fortify and mitigate some of the losses the Democratic Party can potentially, if they can get some of those independents back.
Hold on one second. Am I having deja vu here? I remember there was supposed to be this red wave. It was a couple years ago. Was that it? And it didn't happen. It was like, what happened? They got a blue tidal wave or something. I forget what happened, but there was a similar thing where people were predicting there would be this big red wave, and it did not happen.
Well, I also think, the party out of power, their simplest argument is, why not? Give us a shot. And the problem with this cycle, I think, for Republicans is that it's easy for Democrats to make the case of why not, right? Like when you have a Trump factor, when you have things like abortion, when you have these issues that get to the front of people's minds, it makes it easier for Democrats to say, here's why not. And I think that makes the argument a lot harder in a midterm cycle.
That is the task for Democrats, to make this not just a referendum on the direction of the country or the economy or the president, but a choice. And there are three things working here. One is the Dobbs decision. Another is the hearings. I would argue that in the midst of all of this came the attack in Uvalde and the attack in Highland Park. And these all came together to create an argument that the Republicans are too extreme. And for most of the last year, the Republicans are making the argument that Democrats are too extreme, and it was working with independent voters. I think this has the potential to pull some of them back.
Which is not to say that Republicans are not still favored to win the House of Representatives this fall. And I want to be clear about that. They are. But it just the political environment may be shifting. It's a dynamic thing, and it may be shifting a bit right before our eyes.
And it helps that Democrats are getting things done in Washington. That actually helps them a lot.
Areva Martin, there's been talk about the language when it comes to what's happening and what has happened in Kansas. And everyone's saying, well, it's ambiguous, whatever. But you got people there, they're watching the local news. They're being instructed by certain political groups, telling them which way to vote. I don't think that that's an excuse. That should be an excuse that the language is ambiguous. Yes, would you like to leave the Constitution the way it is, or no? Would you want, no? A no vote would leave the 22-week law in place. So I think it was pretty solid, the language, and to whether you wanted to do it or not.
Yeah, I don't think the language has anything to do with this victory for pro-choice, Don. I think people understand what's at stake, and they're not willing to allow Republican lawmakers, or this minority, as it has been described, to control something so fundamental as women's rights to choose. And I think we're going to see this ballot initiative, or a similar ballot initiative, is going to be on the ballot in Kentucky in November. And then we see in states like California and Vermont, where there's efforts to enshrine in the Constitution the rights that women have to abortion. So Dobbs created this patchwork across the state, every state basically doing something different, making it very difficult for voters to know what's going on. But I think this Kansas vote tonight is a clear victory. We can argue about language, but people know what they know. People are not stupid. And very rarely do people get motivated to go out and vote on ballot initiatives. So the fact that we had this high voter turnout, we have to call it what it is. And it is a victory for women's rights.
Ariva, thank you. Thanks to everyone else as well. I got to get to the breaking news, and it is sad news tonight. Baseball world mourning the loss of Vin Scully, legendary voice of the Los Angeles Dodgers, who died today at the age of 94. The Dodgers organization described Scully as much more than the voice of the team, saying that he was their conscience, their poet laureate, capturing their beauty and chronicling their glory, from Jackie Robinson to Sandy Koufax, Kirk Gibson to Clayton Kershaw. We have lost an icon, said Dodger President and CEO Stan Kasten. We're going to have more on his life in just a moment. So former Trump White House counsel Pat Cipollone has been subpoenaed by a federal grand jury investigating efforts to overturn the 2020 election. A source tells CNN that. Now, Cipollone and his attorneys are discussing ways they're going to handle this appearance before the grand jury, including how to deal with executive privilege issues. That's what the source says. ABC News first to report the subpoena. I want to bring in now CNN senior legal analyst Ellie Honig and CNN global affairs analyst Susan Glasser. Good evening to both of you. Ellie, how big of a deal is the subpoena? Talk to us about the impact of Cipollone's cooperation, what it could have on the Justice Department's investigation.
Well, Pat Cipollone was right at the heart of virtually every stage in the entire effort by Donald Trump and others around him to try to block Congress and steal the election. Virtually every one of the key moments, the meetings in the Oval Office, the meetings with DOJ, the meetings with the other advisors who were in Donald Trump's ear, Pat Cipollone is there. And often Pat Cipollone's role was to tell Donald Trump, no, we can't do this, to push back against the worst excesses and the worst abuses. So, Don, this tells me that DOJ is looking at the inner circle of the Trump White House.
Susan, you know, everyone will try to read something into this. I'm not sure what there is to be read into it, but I'm going to ask you, should this latest development be seen as a big win toward protecting democracy in America?
Well, look, Don, I mean, first of all, it's more than a year and a half after January 6th itself. And, we only are just now getting indications of this Justice Department convened federal grand jury with testimony by some former senior Pence aides in recent weeks, and now the subpoena to Pat Cipollone. So we don't know what it means. There have been no charges of anyone who actually were involved in, convening all those people and bringing them to the Capitol that they stormed on January 6th. So, a note of caution there. But Pat Cipollone, as was said, was a crucial figure in all this, not only pushing back, but he's the one who had to evaluate and explain why the crazy schemes were not just crazy, but illegal. And to me, that's always been very important. Donald Trump was told repeatedly that it wasn't just ill-advised, but that it wasn't constitutional for him to demand that Vice President Pence single-handedly, invalidate the results of the election. He proceeded anyway. So I do think that Cipollone, who's never publicly broken with the president, that his private dealings in this matter are crucial to understanding what was essentially a coup in America against American democracy.
Susan, Ellie, thank you very much. We'll be right back. So now more on our sad news tonight. The baseball world mourning the loss of Vin Scully, legendary voice of the Los Angeles Dodgers, who died today at the age of 94. Andy Scholes has the life and times of an icon.
Hi, everybody, and a very pleasant Thursday evening to you, wherever you may be.
Vin Scully, the revered face of the Dodgers, worthy of a yearbook cover. Flip inside and see the schoolboy who always wanted to become a sportscaster.
We had a big old radio on 4 legs, and I would crawl underneath the radio so that the speaker was directly over my face. And I would be listening to a game that meant absolutely nothing to me, Alabama, Mississippi. But what intrigued me and thrilled me was the roar of the crowd.
The captivated youngster went on to play center field at Fordham University, graduating with a degree in radio. Scully broke in as an announcer with the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1950, as the yearbook shows, mentored by legends Connie Desmond and especially Red Barber.
He was indeed another father, and eventually, many, many years later, he wrote in a column, maybe I was the son that he had never had. Maybe the red hair had something to do with it, but we were that close.
Scully would make any father proud, honored by the Baseball Hall of Fame, lauded by critics, including the author of Voices of the Game.
I think anyone who really has studied baseball broadcasting or indeed heard Vin Scully would agree that Scully is the Roy Hobbs of baseball broadcasting, the best there ever was. He has converted more casual fans into hardened fans and more non-baseball fans into baseball fanatics than virtually any broadcaster that I can think of.
What words can describe Scully's words? Lyrical, poetic, master storyteller.
That 75 club, which bowed finally to the big red machine.
But Scully thinks he made his mark with silence, by not over-announcing the moment.
She is gone!
When Kirk Gibson hit the dramatic home run to beat the Oakland A's in the 1988 World Series, Scully didn't say a word for more than a minute. Then,
in a year that has been so improbable, the impossible has happened.
Scully called the New York Mets' comeback against the Red Sox in the 1986 World Series.
First, behind the bag, it gets through Buckner. Here comes Knight, and the Mets win it.
He also delved into football, calling the catch, Montana to Clark, in the 49ers' famous playoff win over the Cowboys.
Throwing in the end zone.
Scully's popularity often exceeded the players. Late in his career, he served as Grand Marshal of the Rose Parade and Bowl Game. In 2016, he signed off for the last time as a regular broadcaster after 67 seasons calling Dodgers games. Weeks before hanging up his mic, Scully riveted a crowd at the Reagan Library.
If I have a trademark, it would be to call the play as quickly and as accurately as I possibly can, and then shut up and listen to the roar of the crowd. And even to this day, when that crowd roars, I'm that little 8-year-old kid curled underneath the radio back in New York City listening to Alabama, Tennessee.
May he rest in peace. Thanks for watching, everyone. Our coverage continues.